Back in the Dark Ages, there was a creator god who made everything on Earth. He had a devil for a partner, and the devil hated everything God created. Out of spite, the devil made a being who cursed all living things, and his name was Malum. Then he wiped out everything, helpless against his insane power. But against all odds, a woman appeared, gifted with the power to fight back. She used God's power to destroy Malum and saved the world from total darkness. People worshipped this woman without question, calling her a saint. From that day on, a Gratia was founded, built by the king in honor of the saint. Many years have passed since then, and now a girl embodies the power of God. Her name was Violet, a name that comes from the name of a beautiful flower. Right now, she was out on the balcony, playing games with the guy she was talking to. It was Esselmund Ermengarde, the dude she had that whole complicated thing with. The saint smiled and asked if she should congratulate him on his victory. She threw out some options, but he didn't think any of them were genuine. The girl closed her eyes and admitted he had a point. Esselmund fixed her with a cold stare and asked if she felt anything at all. She threw her hands up when he told her she belonged to the temple from now on. The girl kept playing along, asking if she should thank them for being her family. Despite the warm words, the saint's sarcastic tone gave her away. She looked away and asked why he was bringing this up now. The guy just watched her, stone-faced, as she smirked like a fox. She left him with that grin, telling him not to sweat it. The saint declared, all sass, that she had zero intention of meekly going to the temple. She ended their chat right there and went back to the party. Violet started talking to the man who took her in, the one who was like a dad to her. Everyone froze when Cardinal Chesure walked into the hall. His shifty amber eyes locked right on her. The priest announced that from now on, she had to stay away from the world she knew. She had to leave her castle and go with the cardinal, become a member of the temple. He added, all dramatic, that she would now be praising God. Chesure smirked, watching how the Holy Maiden would react. He spoke to her first, demanding to know an approximate date for her trip to the temple. After a short pause, she announced she was about to make a bold declaration. She shocked everyone by saying she was unworthy to ascend the holy throne. Her statement was so off the wall that everyone's jaw just dropped. She claimed that she was currently unable to use her God-given power. Violet said this while looking Cardinal Chesure directly in the eyes. He definitely wasn't expecting her to back out so cleverly. One of the priests accused her of lying to avoid going to the temple. She just said they could see for themselves if they didn't believe her. The priest hesitated, realizing this was going to be a real problem. But Chesure decided to see it as a challenge and stepped right up. He slowly reached his hand out, right towards the Holy Maiden. To his surprise, he really couldn't detect any divine power in her body. He figured she'd planned this whole thing from the start. The girl brushed his hand away and said there was no reason to celebrate her coming of age. She blamed her lowly birth, claiming it angered God. The Holy Maiden offered a sincere apology, but her smile said otherwise. A lot of folks thought being the Holy Maiden meant you were somebody of nobility, but for the people in power, she was just a pawn on the board. Everyone was trying to grab control of her and tighten their grip on power. She didn't have the strength to fight them alone, but she refused to give in. Saint Violet wasn't about to become another pawn in someone else's game. Leaving the banquet hall, she cursed this miserable world once again. No one had any idea what she'd been through to get to this point. Again, she remembered the dream that started it all. As a child, she was wandering through a never-ending field. She turned and saw an evil spirit, clearly thrilled to have finally found her. In that voice, boundless joy was mixed with tears. She could feel the entity wanting to possess her completely. Violet wanted to run as far as she could, but she was stuck. She froze, watching those dark claws reach for her body. The monster engulfed her, like it wanted to become a part of her. She woke up after the monster told her she could never escape it. Then that cranky old goat, who took in the orphan, started yelling at her again. She was chewing Violet out for being ungrateful and threatening her with suffering. Granny Goat just went on and on about what would have happened to her if it wasn't for her kindness. Violet clenched her trembling hands, scared out of her mind. Only after she hung her head did Goat finally leave. The door slammed shut, promising another rough day ahead. Ever since she was a kid, poor Violet's been having the same damn dream. In this dream, some voice just keeps calling out to her, over and over. At first, it felt kinda nice, made her want to be close to it. But then, every time, she'd get goosebumps and just bolt. Still, this night, that voice finally caught up to her. She couldn't escape, got completely swallowed up. Shaken after the nightmare, the girl headed downstairs. The pretty girl, Lena, asked if the old hag had been beating on her again. The girl said it was her own fault, and then got a pat on the head. Violet looked at her roommate and asked if she was okay. She said yes, then started thinking again about how anyone could hit her. Violet caught the old hag's hand a lot, and only the girls felt sorry for her. The second she flinched from the touch, Lena got all worried about her. The girl froze when another woman's voice called her back to work. That girl was Rose, strict and scary thanks to the old woman's slaps. She saw Lena walking away and called out for her to come help. The blonde started begging for a day off, but Rose wasn't having it. They called this place Flower Street, which was code for brothel. The girls on this street got flower names. That's just how it worked. That's how she ended up with the name Violet. Even the madam took clients, despite her age. This street was a total cesspool. Morals didn't exist. Every night, beautiful girls, like flowers, were tormented here. Men ripped off their gorgeous petals for practically nothing. They'd constantly abuse them, sometimes crushing them until their last breath. That's exactly the kind of future little Violet was facing. In the morning, they gathered for breakfast, sharing their worries. Frisia started talking about the priests who were frequent customers. All she ever did was daydream about her noble knight. They noticed their sad colleague, who looked like she'd gotten a real creep. Just because he was a priest didn't stop him from doing some seriously messed up stuff. Finally, the girl screamed, not believing this place was supposed to be some holy kingdom. Lydia sobbed, not understanding why the saint wouldn't show up to save them. She wiped away her tears, asking a bunch of questions all along the same lines. Rose just cynically replied that God had abandoned them a long time ago. She put down a mug of wine and added that he probably wasn't gonna save lowlifes like them. Beaten up Violet lowered her head, lost in thought. Just one look at her made Lydia start to worry. Rose glanced at the girl and asked what could be wrong with her. She added that with a pretty face like that, she could easily make a living. The girls agreed, telling her she had the most beautiful eyes. They showered the kid with compliments, making her blush like crazy. Rose squeezed Violet in a tight hug, just like a mom would. She looked at her, calling them their only chance at survival. The girl asked if she thought they were dirty or something. Violet thought they were gorgeous, like the sweetest smelling flowers. Even if people pointed fingers, their hearts were pure and good. To the girl, they were the most beautiful people in the world. She loved hanging out with them, seeing them as her big sisters. Sadly, their happiness lasted until old Goatface showed up. That woman looked like she was about to incinerate them with a death stare. You could see the fear creep across their faces as they realized what was coming. Rose tried to stop her, but she practically flew at Violet. Next thing you know, she backhanded the girl across the face, hard. She snarled, asking if she thought she was joking or something. She ignored everyone saying the girl hadn't even been drinking. Gout wound up her leg, ready to kick some serious ass. She was pissed that these young punks had swiped her booze. She reminded Rose that she'd told her not to bring them alcohol. Rose begged her to stop, scared she was gonna beat the girl to death. Lena grabbed the old hag by the shoulders, trying to take all the blame. But the old woman just kept hitting. Didn't matter she was only 10. She raised her hand again, and that's when Rose yelled she'd pay for her booze. She ripped the silver hairpin from her hair, full of hate. The girl threw it at the old woman's feet, just to get her to leave the kid alone. The woman just looked down at her like she was trash. Her eyes locked onto Rose's hateful stare. She bent down without a word and picked up the silver thing. The goat sneered, asking if it was a gift from a John. She left, saying Violet was going without dinner tonight. The girl froze, feeling the blood trickle down her lip. It hurt like hell, but she didn't utter a single word. The women wiped her down and realized her body was burning up. She tried to get up and make dinner, but her body just crashed back into sleep. A snow-white girl stood before her, saying that the time had come. She didn't get why this girl was telling her to wake up. The girl was practically begging her to wake up already. Violet didn't understand why her pleas were so sad. She started crying, realizing there was nothing she could do. Only then did she wake up, hearing Lena scream. She barely managed to crack her eyes open and spotted a girl. This girl was wearing a cloak and practically demanded she wake up. Violet struggled to sit up, totally confused about what was going on. Rose burst into the room, yelling that the thugs were already here. Violet's body was burning up, but they had no choice but to run. The girl's heart was pounding like it wanted to jump out of her chest. Rose grabbed her hand firmly, saying they didn't have time for tears. She didn't understand what was happening until she saw a bright blaze. Their whole village was burning to the ground, all thanks to the invaders. Their homes were shaking with the screams of the unfortunate residents. Violet watched families try to escape, only to be cut down. The thugs were wiping out the poor villagers one by one. She didn't know what to do, but adrenaline surged through her. They pushed forward, feeling the whole house fill with smoke and ash. Lydia headed to the emergency exit, threw open the door, and yelled, "Run!" They bolted forward before they choked to death for good. Rose yelled at Lydia for not leaving and waiting for them. The girl just winked and said she couldn't leave them behind. They burst out of the house just as the beams started collapsing. Looks like every roof was engulfed in flames. No chance of saving anything. Frisia was a nervous wreck, waiting for the others, gnawing on her fingers. She finally perked up when she saw the girls coming towards her. "What the hell are you doing back here for the kid?" she asked them, totally baffled. They knew it could get them killed, but they couldn't just leave the girl behind. The girl remembered Will's words and declared they'd be safe in the woods, past the mountain. They listened to Frisia and headed straight into the deep, dark forest. The girls pulled down their hoods, loving the feel of the fresh air. Lydia happily thought about how they were finally going to be free. Frisia said there was a town beyond the mountain, ruled by a noble sworn to the king's sword. They kept moving, excitedly talking about what they were going to do next. They were just stoked to finally be ditching that hellhole. Violet glanced at Rose, who was tugging her along by the hand. That gentle smile of hers gave her hope for a brighter future. A couple minutes later, Rose froze, sensing something was off. Her feet just stopped, and she started listening real close. She held up a hand, ordering everyone to shut up and stay put. Her gut was right, and they spotted bright flames up ahead. They didn't realize it, but they were facing soldiers, bringers of death. All the girls froze in place, listening for the sound of footsteps. The next thing they knew, an army of dudes appeared before them. Violet squeezed Rose's cloak, scared stiff by the sight of the armor. The girl told her to chill, figuring it was guards coming to deal with the bandits. Frisia's face lit up when she spotted her client, Will. She ran up to him, ready to crush him in a hug. She wrapped her arms around him, saying she was going to look for him as soon as she got to town. The girl was practically glowing, calling him her knight in shining armor. That was the only time she ever saw disgust in his eyes. The girls noticed the knight's freaky expressions. Their hunch was right on the money when the guy whipped out his sword in a flash. He ran Frisia through with one clean, stone-cold move. One hit was all it took. The blood made that pretty damn clear. Rose's jaw dropped, a mix of shock and raw terror hitting her hard. They couldn't believe the royal guard were the same thugs who did this. The girls just stared at their sister's lifeless body, frozen in place. 10-year-old Violet was paralyzed with fear for their lives. She remembered how happily Frisia had talked about Will. She was laughing just a second ago, and now all their hopes are shattered. They vanished, like they were never even there. Only Knight Will's sword kept glinting with menace. He mentioned Marquis Ermengarde's order for all bandits to be eliminated. That's when they knew they weren't getting out of there alive. Rose grabbed Violet's hand and bolted, running as fast as she could. They plunged into the thick of the woods, praying they could escape them. The knights immediately took off after the fleeing girls. Violet ran, glancing back every now and then. Then, in a flash, an iron arrow pierced right through their sister, Lydia. She didn't even get a word out before her life was snuffed out. She crashed to the ground, scaring the hell out of Violet. The girl screamed her name, tears welling up in her eyes. Lydia's bloody body lay on the ground as she tried to beg for help. Another flower just got stomped out, just like that. The rest of the girls bolted, not even looking back. They didn't get why they had to pay the price for something they didn't do. Any hope they had left was crushed when they got surrounded. Lena froze, putting herself between the others and them. Violet was shaking, terrified, like this was the end of the line. For some reason, the knights just froze up when they saw the color of her eyes. Sir Will ripped into them for stopping. The other knights couldn't disobey an order and kept moving forward. Rose tried to explain they had nothing to do with the bandits. Still, the knights kept coming. They screamed when they saw that massive mace heading their way. The girls shielded Violet with their bodies, trying to save her. The next second, they were completely obliterated. Violet watched them fall lifeless to the ground. She didn't even realize who that person was, hugging her one last time. Her vision was blurred. She couldn't even make them out. The knight moved forward, like he wanted to save her for last. The girl trembled even harder, staring into his eyes. She was sure she was next, but something told her to wake up. The sound of cracking bones echoed, and I swear I thought that was it for her. She looked up at the knight, surprised she wasn't feeling any pain. Then, boom, his bloodied body just slammed onto the ground. Even Will, the knight, couldn't hide his shock. Violet was totally lost. Didn't get why everyone was staring like that. Will shook off the daze somehow and hopped off his horse. He walked right up to the girl and dropped to one knee in front of her. Violet thought she was a goner, but something completely flipped the script. Everyone started calling her a saint and went down on their knees. The stunned girl didn't even notice she was changing, right before their eyes. The next morning, all hell broke loose at Agretia Castle. Representatives from every religious group were thrown for a loop by her showing up. One guy had to double-check where exactly she'd popped up. Marquis Bern Ermengarde just watched the others, not saying a word. They were pissed that her arrival meant the Pope's faction might get back on top. It had been 120 years since a saint last appeared. The men were floored that she was just some dirty commoner. A lot of those guys figured the whole thing was just a legend. They realized if she's real, that means Malum is too. King Agretia slammed his fist on the table, telling them all to shut it. He couldn't believe she showed up in his lifetime. His eyes darted around, thinking even God had abandoned him. Every few decades, the saint and Malum would clash. 120 years ago, Saint Anastasia vanished after her victory. She foretold that evil wouldn't give up, but neither would God. The king figured the prophecy was about current events. One of the guys said the saint's influence would be greater than the pope's. The Marquis replied that right now she's just a little girl. That means everything could change as she gets older. If the pope gets his hands on her, she'll become his puppet. After his reply, the guy awkwardly apologized for what he'd said. The other dude chimed in, saying the temple people would be here soon. They needed to figure out a plan before then. The Marquis glanced over at King Triton, the wise one. He'd been trying to wash away the shame of the previous king for years. That old king got his butt kicked and lost the throne. The Marquis wondered if God had really turned his back on him. Triton just kept on thinking hard about the situation. The Marquis said, confident, that he knew a way out for all of them. Meanwhile, the girl was seeing those past events all over again. She remembered her mom begging her to run, sacrificing herself. The girl watched as those thugs wiped her out right in front of her. Her dad tried to protect her mom, but it was all for nothing. They were surrounded by these terrifying, snarling faces. Violet froze, tears streaming down her face, watching this hell unfold. Her mother's twisted hands reached for her, pleading for help. The girl cried, burning with the feeling of her own helplessness. Her mother kept screaming her name, desperate to save her. She looked up and saw a sinister figure looming over her. All of it turned out to be a nightmare that haunted her for years. She bolted upright in bed, not even taking a second to check her surroundings. Violet tried to chill out, figure out what the hell was going on. Only then did the events of last night start flooding back. Her mind went dark just thinking about her dead sisters. She clamped her mouth shut, feeling the bile rising in her throat. Violet squeezed her eyes shut, realizing this wasn't some freaking dream. A pounding headache snapped her back to attention, and she saw the window frames. They were different from the ones back at her old safe house. The girl froze, trying to wrap her head around where she was. She gripped the sheet, like everything around her was just some kind of illusion. Violet jumped at the sound of the maid's voice as she walked in. The girl brought her a glass of water and asked how she was feeling. Violet gathered her thoughts and asked where she was. The maid replied that it was the residence of Marquis Ermengarde. She immediately figured that had to be some high-status nobleman. Her body trembled as she tried to remember where she'd heard that name. The maid asked her what hurt. The girl flinched when she heard herself called a saint. She thought the saint was in the room, not realizing it was her. She asked the maid, surprised, who she was talking to. A chill ran down her spine when the woman said she was talking to her. She yanked her little hand away, saying, "No way, that's not me." Violet kept saying she wasn't a saint. They had the wrong person. She started shaking, begging them to have mercy and believe she wasn't lying. The maid told her not to talk like that, or God would get pissed. The girl burst into tears, thinking this had to be some kind of mistake. The maid gently took her hand and told her to listen closely. She led the girl to a mirror so she could see her reflection. The next second, Violet was staring at a completely different girl. Her hands trembled just looking at the hair that used to be light brown. She couldn't wrap her head around why even her eye color had changed. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch her own reflection. Violet remembered her old self, like she couldn't believe it was really her. The maid brushed back her bangs, revealing the holy stigmata. They were proof that God had chosen her to be a saint. All these years, she'd lived thinking God had abandoned her soul. She started rubbing at the mark on her forehead, like she was rejecting all of it. Violet broke down crying, convinced the person in the mirror wasn't her. All this information crashed down on her like an avalanche. She collapsed on the floor, sobbing in terror at what had happened. The second maid told them to get the saint dressed, pronto. She added that the king himself ordered her to be escorted to the palace. That same day, the palace was buzzing with another heated debate. The temple reps were furious about his unilateral decision. The Marquis shot back that the saint was originally from his territory. He was certain that's why his family was obligated to raise her right. The other guy protested, calling it a load of bull. He was practically foaming at the mouth, saying the Marquis would pay for this. The king just watched the confrontation unfold, lost in thought. He knew a real battle for the saint was about to kick off. A few hours earlier, the Marquis had dropped his decision on him. The king listened to his proposal, tapping the table, deep in thought. The guy boldly suggested making the saint the adopted daughter of his lineage. Everyone was floored by such an audacious move, favoring the Marquis himself. The man saw all the mixed reactions around him. Saint Aubert was the only place that remembered the saint even existed after all these years. In that territory, the Pope's power held even more sway than the king's. The nobles who sided with the Pope's faction were dumping tons of cash into the church, which meant the saint showing up could only boost the Pope's influence even more. That's exactly why they needed to get her on their side first. He pointed out that all the previous saints were nobles and never had to learn etiquette. This time, the saint's just a commoner, without any formal schooling. He was pushing hard for her to be raised in an aristocratic family. The Marquis added that they should have insisted she live on his land. The king agreed the Pope's faction wouldn't be able to object. One of the advisors spoke up about how risky this plan was. The king just asked him if he had a better option to suggest. The guy immediately started coughing, totally unable to come up with anything. After that, the king grimly concluded there was no other way. All they could do was hope the saint accepted the hand they were offering. Meanwhile, Violet was just stepping out of the carriage. She'd managed to pull herself together and agree to the ride. The girl looked ahead in surprise, spotting a ridiculously fancy palace. It was decked out in precious metals and sparkling like crazy. The girl felt a twinge of nervousness before going inside. Not long ago, she'd been in that carriage, bawling her eyes out. Her maid had been doing her best to comfort the broken little girl. She was burning with confusion about what the heck just happened. She woke up from a horrifying nightmare, and everything had flipped upside down. Even her eyes, the ones she was named after, now glowed bright blue. She clutched her dress, scared shitless, wondering if she'd even make it out alive. Violet suddenly realized she didn't even have a place to go back to. That thought hit her even harder, like her whole life was doomed. The maid felt genuinely sorry for the little girl. She tried to reassure her, telling her everything would be all right. She stroked the girl's hair, saying she was the most important person in the country. The maid did everything she could to calm the girl down before the reception. Then she smiled gently and introduced herself as Finn. The girl looked up at her and noticed a striking resemblance to her mother. Guess that helped her trust her maid a little bit at least. After a while, she found herself in front of a sprawling palace. Finn announced her arrival at the palace and wished her good luck. She sized up the interior nervously, not knowing what was coming next. Violet wasn't crying anymore, but her soul felt hollow. Sadly, Finn couldn't go inside the palace with her. She wouldn't be so scared if she were by her side. Even though Finn was a stranger, she was the only one she trusted. Finally, they stood right in front of the massive doors. The girl froze, hearing a loud commotion behind the door. A guard roughly grabbed the girl's arm and squeezed. He gave her a look of disgust and told her to head inside. Violet couldn't resist, so she braced herself for the worst. As soon as she stepped inside, she walked right into a raging argument. All three sides froze when they announced the Saintess had arrived. Violet moved forward slowly, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. She didn't get why everyone had suddenly gone so quiet. The girl quickly glanced around and saw rows of harsh, glaring eyes. She felt uncomfortable with everyone staring at her so openly. A ton of questions popped into her head about why she was even there. She felt like she couldn't even lift her head because she was so scared. The emperor smirked, looking down at the puny little saint. They told her to kneel before the king. The church rep immediately piped up, saying a saint doesn't kneel for a king. All the commotion made the girl squeeze her eyes shut in fear. She just collapsed to the ground, like she was some kind of slave. Violet kept thinking it was all some kind of mistake, right up until the end. She was scared they'd beat her even worse than Grandma Goat did. The girl was totally lost, especially when the king ordered her to raise her head. The man slowly rose from his throne. The girl started shaking even harder when she saw him coming closer. "Get up!" the king boomed, loud enough to shake the room. Violet shot to her feet like her life depended on it. She was trying to hurry, but her clumsy ass tripped on the hem of her dress. BAM! She ate floor, which naturally pissed everyone off. They immediately started whispering about what a trashy commoner she was. Violet squeezed her eyes shut, wishing this moment of shame would end. The next thing she knew, she was surrounded by a different crowd. Church officials swarmed her, hauling her back to her feet. She blinked, surprised, taking in the priests all around her. And then she spotted one familiar face in the crowd. A priest she knew. She recognized him. That was the priest who tormented Lydia. He beat an innocent girl, just taking out all his rage on her. He used to be so intimidating and arrogant, but now he's ready to beg at her feet. They surrounded her from all sides, even the high priest of Dublin. The king suggested the saint should make her own choice. The high priest objected, considering how much the church needed a saint. The king turned to the Marquis, asking him to offer something. He stepped forward and greeted the messenger of God. He knelt on one knee, adding that he was honored to meet her. His name was Beorn Ermengarde, a powerful marquise in the kingdom. His name was the same one she'd already heard after waking up. The king laid down the law, told her to decide where she was staying. She had to choose between the church and the Marquisate of Beorn. Violet wasn't ready for this kind of pressure. They were offering her the choice between living at the temple or becoming the Marquis's adopted daughter. The priest tried to pick for her, saying she had to be at the temple. The king shut him down instantly, calling it an outrage. He asked how the priest even dared to interrupt the king. He turned back to Violet and said no one would challenge her decision. Living with the Marquis, she could slowly get to know this world. They'd brainwash her with the basics of theocracy and servitude. The second she stepped into the temple, the girl was crushed by how quickly they demanded an answer to such a huge question. In just one day, she found out she was a saint, and then she was standing in front of the king. She had no clue if her choice was right, so she decided to trust her gut. Finally, the saint pointed her finger at Marquise Bjorn Ermengarde. She didn't want to be around people like that scumbag. The king didn't show it, but he was stoked that everything was going according to plan. The priest kept denying it until the very end, saying she was wrong. The Marquis said that since he'd hurt her, he had to pay for his sins. He remembered how the priest was wondering how he'd answer for everything. The Marquis stood up, shielding the woman who chose him. He stalked toward the guy, saying that was his final answer. The priest was livid, but he could barely argue back. They just kept burning holes through each other with their eyes. The king was thinking he should take the card, even if it wasn't a killer hand. But he wasn't sure if they could even use the saintess as a play. That thought was consuming him, considering all the risk involved. The Marquis knew that from now on, they were in for a serious fight. He noticed Duke Tigernan still hadn't arrived from the papal territory. He'd probably use any dirty trick to snatch the saintess for himself. Chances are, he wouldn't even hesitate to use brute force. That's exactly why they needed to haul ass before he showed up. With that in mind, he reached out his hand to the girl and offered to leave. She hesitantly touched the hand of what was now her guardian. The priest started screaming again, saying he couldn't just take the saint. The Marquis just replied that the saint herself had made the decision. He leaned on him, asking if he really intended to stand in the way of the saint's will. The guy gave in and shut his mouth, letting them leave the hall. The other servants kept sadly calling out her name. Once they were in the carriage, the girl noticed Finn wasn't around. Violet was sitting there, all jumpy, like danger was waiting for her. She hated the feeling of the Marquis's eyes boring into her. Right away, she started thinking she'd messed something up. Violet squeezed her eyes shut and ducked her head, scared stiff. The Marquis thanked her for the hardships she'd endured getting to the capital. Then, like he was thinking out loud, he added that there weren't any women in his house. That threw her, since she'd seen tons of maids around. The guy clarified that there weren't any women in his family, besides the help. The girl clenched her fists, not understanding why he was even bringing this up. She kept trembling under his piercing gaze. After a short pause, he promised to make sure she wanted for nothing. Violet looked at the guy again, wondering if she could even trust him. She'd never even caught a glimpse of a rich marquise like this before. She didn't know if she could even dare to dream of becoming the saint. Violet remembered where she came from and wondered when the Marquis's kindness would run out. There was nothing she could do about it, so she just accepted her fate. She silently followed Marquis Bjorn the whole time. The girl felt a wave of relief the moment she saw her favorite maid. She went straight to the woman, like she was the only person she could trust. The Marquise immediately exchanged a meaningful look with the butler. The guy told Finn she was going to be serving the saintess now. The maid smiled at the girl, saying she'd be there to help her out. The saintess felt relieved, because everyone else was kind of freaking her out. It was the first time she'd actually cracked a smile since arriving. The Marquise felt a surge of joy seeing his new daughter smile like that. Finn asked him if she should introduce her to the young masters. The guy answered coldly that the introductions would happen tomorrow morning. Violet was surprised he was already heading out. The man turned around when the saintess got chewed out for something she did. That one sentence echoed through the whole palace that evening. The girl froze right there, like a scolded kitten. Her heart started pounding, thinking she'd messed something up. She just wanted to say goodnight to the Marquise before bed. But they stopped her. Seems like her adoptive father caught on to what she was thinking with just one look. He knelt down and told her that in this country, she's the most important person, right up there with the king and the pope. The Marquis added that she shouldn't bow her head to anyone. The girl agreed with him, but still asked if he was her father now. That sweet, innocent question made the Marquis's heart stop. Violet sadly asked if she wasn't allowed to wish her father goodnight. He was really touched that she'd reached out to him like that. He wished her goodnight back and reached out to pat her head. He stopped himself when he saw how freaked out she looked. The Marquis left the room without a word, lost in his own head. Both Finn and the saint could see how pensive he'd become. Marquis Born Ermengarde leaned against the wall, turning it all over in his mind. It wasn't easy for him to accept that God's messenger was now his daughter. The next morning, Finn greeted the saint like she always did. She noticed with concern how swollen the girl's eyes were. Finn started trying to comfort the girl who'd been crying all night. Looks like Violet had given in to the melancholy and sadness of the night. She couldn't sleep, her mind racing with a million different thoughts. Violet didn't know if she'd live a long life, or if she'd be wiped out too. Constant worry just kept giving her new reasons to cry. Finn was arranging her hair, talking about her incredible powers. Her body used to be covered in bruises and scars, but now she was spotless. The maid smiled and guessed that that was the saint's power. The girl herself seemed to realize for the first time that nothing hurt anymore. Finn asked if she was ready to meet the young masters. The saint froze, feeling a fresh wave of anxiety wash over her. Back then, all the nobles in the flower district were arrogant and cruel. That's exactly why she was so worried about how she'd be received. She knew she couldn't escape her fate, but it still freaked her out. Finn was hurrying her along, subtly hinting that they might be late. She finally left the room, clinging to her skirt until the very end. A couple of minutes later, she saw the Marcus's completely different sons for the first time. The third son, Adrian, rudely said that her hair color reminded him of a ghost. Right after her, the Marquis arrived and ordered everyone to greet her properly. He gave his mischievous sons a stern look. Adrian was about to argue when he found out she was a saint. Only Daniel scolded him for his tactlessness and politely introduced himself to her. He flashed a smile, introducing himself as Marquis Ermengarde's second son. The saintess blushed, kind of flustered seeing a dude this good-looking for the first time. She froze up when they told her she had to give him permission to stand. The girl awkwardly looked away, saying he could get up now. Adrian immediately rushed over, asking if she was too dumb to get it. He didn't want to be kneeling before his little sister, no way. The Marquis just gave him a look, and that was enough to shut him up. He couldn't believe he actually had to grovel before some commoner. Violet knew he had a point, since something like this was usually unthinkable. Adrian clammed up instantly, hearing the ice in his father's voice. The guy was pissed at his son for being such a damn clod. Adrian bolted and hid behind his brother Daniel. The Marquis tried to get a grip on his anger and sighed, exhausted. He told Finn to take the Saintess to her spot. Finn immediately led the Saintess to her seat at the table. Adrian was still ticked off that they'd be seeing her all the time now. He kept staring daggers at the little Saintess's back. Even sitting at the table, he wanted to make her squirm. The whole time, she kept worrying she'd messed something up again. Finally, her jaw dropped when she saw the crazy spread on the table. She'd never seen food look so freaking delicious before. Years of starving had definitely left their mark on the kid. The Marquis noticed his eldest son, Esselmund, wasn't there. Hearing he'd already bounced from the castle just pissed him off. The girl had just noticed the empty spot next to her. She was blown away by how many heirs this family had. As soon as everyone started eating, she totally froze up. The saint felt a wave of shame, because she had no idea how to eat this stuff. Looks like Adrian was loving this chance to mess with the girl. He looked at her like he'd just figured out her darkest secret. The kid called her a dummy who didn't even know how to eat. He winked and agreed, knowing she probably hadn't seen food like this before. The boy was surprised to see how much his words had hurt her. Daniel, sitting next to them, cut off a piece of meat and told him to stop. He added that Adrian's table manners weren't much better, so he should shut his mouth. Meanwhile, Finn handed the girl a knife so she could use it. The Marquis watched this learning process closely. He suddenly announced that they should take some etiquette lessons. The Saintess looked at the man who took her in, feeling ashamed. He just closed his eyes and kept cutting up his food. After a short pause, she agreed to his demand that she train. She had no idea that even just eating could be this damn hard. The saint squeezed her eyes shut, confused by the sudden weight in her stomach. Finn noticed that Daniel, the second son, had approached them. He tried to support the girl, telling her Adrian had always been like that. She looked at the guy, surprised, not believing he'd actually take her side. The guy told her not to sweat it and to trust that things could get better. He was comforting her on one hand, but also pointing out how horrible her manners actually were. The saint wasn't sure if she could really pull this off. Looks like Daniel noticed just how much she'd changed. The girl bolted from them, as fast as her little legs could carry her. The maids chased after her, and noticed she was puking all over the floor. Finn watched this and felt a mix of pity and disgust. She couldn't take her eyes off the saint, hunched over, throwing up. Finn went to the kid, stroked her hair, and asked if she was okay. Violet didn't know what she'd do if she threw up every time she ate. She had no clue why she was having these eating problems. Finn stood up and told her she should take a bath and chill out. She also found out she had a meeting scheduled with the king today. The saint was embarrassed by all the attention and said she could wash herself. They told her it was the maid's job, but she wouldn't budge. The girl lowered her head, embarrassed, waiting for them to leave. Meanwhile, Marquis Bjorn Emmergard was already waiting for her downstairs. The butler chuckled, saying young ladies always take forever to get ready. Finally, they spotted her coming down the stairs. She was walking with her maid, Finn, and was wearing a bright dress. The butler immediately commented that the mansion seemed to light up. The Marquis quipped, asking if it was ever actually dark in here. He didn't wait for her to reach the bottom, and just told her to get going. Violet was getting anxious about seeing the king again. She looked at Finn like she was asking if she was going to screw things up again. The maid just smiled and wished her a safe journey. Violet glanced at her, not saying a word. She froze, staring at her adoptive father, and felt a flicker of hope. She truly believed and hoped that nothing bad would happen today. After a while, they ended up in the king's reception hall. They stood frozen by the entrance, waiting for permission to enter. The Marquis said she had to be super careful at the monarch's reception, or when talking to his family. He also added that she should run if she saw any priests. The Marquis said grimly that they were always looking for a chance to snatch her. That's exactly why she needs to bail if she ends up alone. She agreed, because the priests were the ones beating her sisters. Violet vowed to herself, no way was she leaving. The Marquis closed his eyes and let out a thoughtful breath. A couple minutes later, they were in King Agredia's office. The girl barely squeezed out a word when he asked her name. Her palms started shaking when he pointed out she's even named after a flower. He asked if the Marquis knew that, but got a negative. The king was surprised he didn't even know his adopted daughter's name. He glanced at the girl and saw how badly she wanted to get out of there. They talked about teaching her etiquette first, then getting a theologian to tutor her. Meanwhile, the girl was freaking out, terrified of screwing up. She was totally caught off guard when the Marquis suggested she learn fencing. The king agreed with him, though he seemed a little surprised by it. The Marquis figured she'd need some muscle to take down Malum. Their words just threw the already insecure girl into total confusion. She'd never studied before, and now she was getting hit with all these different subjects. The king noticed her mood and suggested she needed a break. Violet immediately perked up, not wanting to show how tired she was. But despite her trying to play it cool, the Marquis was on board with it. Violet was just thinking about how she screwed up again. A couple minutes later, she found herself by a beautiful fountain, trying to chill out. The kid was blown away by the crazy shapes the water made. She took a good look around, feeling like she was in some kind of paradise. Totally mesmerized, she froze, just listening to the sound. She was shocked when a beautiful little bird landed in her hands. The saint immediately smiled at the bird, like she could hear its thoughts. The servant noticed she looked like a totally different person when she smiled. Violet straight up admitted that she was happy the bird came to her. The guy was stunned and asked if she could understand what it was saying. The girl smiled, saying it was weird that someone could understand her. Her companion was seriously impressed by the saint's abilities. He felt that holy power in the air for the very first time. He figured she was favored by the God who created all life. The girl had a hard time seeing herself that way, and she doubted it. They both turned when that annoying priest came running up to them. The bird flew out of her hands the second she recognized that scumbag. He instantly dropped to his knees in front of her, calling himself God's servant. The priest rudely grabbed her arm and yanked her towards him. He started in again about how it wasn't too late to go to the temple. The priest was staring at her like some kind of psycho, and it was freaking her out. The guy guarding her snapped at him, asking him what the hell he thought he was doing. The jerk protested, saying some servant had to respect a man of the cloth. He started threatening him with God's wrath and paying for his sins. Violet was watching his face like a hawk. It looked way too much like the day he was beating her sister. She bit his hand as hard as she could to get away. They tried to stop her, but she bolted as fast as she could. She was terrified the priest would try to chase her down and grab her. After what her guardian said, she thought they might lock her up in the temple and abuse her. Out of nowhere, she spotted a bird in the sky and just had to follow it. Long story short, the bird vanished, and she was totally lost in the palace. She had no clue where she was, but knew she had to get back. Violet just stood there frozen until someone grabbed her hand. She freaked out again when she saw her hand being squeezed and pulled. Scared it was another guy from the temple, she started screaming. She didn't want to be locked up in that temple again and bit the guy's sleeve. He didn't even flinch at the bite, just told her to calm down. The girl stopped, realizing that it wasn't the priest's voice. She finally looked up and saw a young man standing there. To her surprise, he looked a hell of a lot like her guardian, the Marquis. His eyes were like the ocean, and his clothes were trimmed with gold thread. She suddenly remembered Rose telling her about the prince from the castle. It hit the kid like, damn, she was actually telling the truth. She kept staring at him until he reached out and grabbed her hand. She suddenly freaked, realizing, oh crap, what have I done? Violet dropped to the floor in a bow and begged the prince for forgiveness. She was terrified that her actions would get the Marquis in deep trouble. After all her apologies, he asked if she seriously thought he was the prince. The girl was stunned, totally missing how badly she'd messed up. She flinched away, scared. When he reached out his hand to her, she thought he was gonna hit her, but he just crouched down next to her. She looked into his blue eyes again and felt the warmth of his hands. Then, in one smooth move, he pulled her to her feet beside him. She froze when he stated they needed to leave, and her father was searching. Finally, he introduced himself as the first son, Esselmund Ermengarde. Violet wanted the ground to swallow her whole from embarrassment. He also added that Prince Charles would only be turning 5 this year. Esselmund told her to be more careful about what she said. He added in a scary way that if he hadn't found her, their whole family would already be facing execution. The thought of what her mistake could cause just froze Violet solid. Could her screw-up really bring down the whole family? Unbelievable. Still gripping Esselmund's hand, she quietly followed him onward. Even though his words were cold, she was surprised his hand stayed warm. Back at the palace, Finn thought something seemed off about the saint. She asked if the Marquis had really blown up at him yesterday because of her. The girl was surprised by her question, wondering if she was supposed to be punished. Yesterday, they actually praised her for ditching the priest. The Marquis was just shocked that she came back with Esselmund. She didn't know why, but it was written all over his face. Finn just dropped that she's getting a tutor starting today. Apparently, it's gonna be Viscountess Cander's wife, some high society lady. Finally, Finn finished getting her ready and did a fancy braid in her hair. She said the Viscountess would be here after noon and told her to grab some breakfast. Violet was bummed, scared she'd screw things up again. She froze at the hall doors, totally not wanting to go in. The girl took a deep breath and sucked it up, joining them anyway. She was surprised to see Esselmund at breakfast this morning. A maid carefully seated her next to the young master. Violet was still feeling awkward about what went down yesterday. She froze when they put a plate of dessert in front of her. She was blown away by how soft and shiny this bread looked. Still not sure how to use the silverware, she just grabbed it and started chomping. She was used to stale bread, but this stuff was unreal. The Marquise was totally focused on how much she was enjoying it. Seemed like he didn't even care how she was eating it. Unlike her, Adrian wasn't feeling the taste of this sweet roll. He shut his mouth quick when he saw the Marquise give him a death glare. It was only then that he noticed the way Violet was eating. He yelled that she should use a knife and called her a dumbass. He called her cream-smeared face disgusting. Said he'd rather be blind. Violet freaked out, not knowing what she should do first. In an instant, the awesome vibe turned suffocating, and the food was gross. Finn sensed her distress and wiped her messy mouth. Daniel took her side, reminding them she hadn't even started training yet. Adrian asked, annoyed, when her skills were gonna improve. He was pissed he had to look at that crap during every meal. All those insults made Violet feel nauseous again. She couldn't let them see it and tried to get away. She accidentally bumped a plate of half-eaten bread, and it crashed onto the table. Violet freaked out even harder when the plate shattered. Now she was totally sure she was going to get punished and beaten. She apologized and started picking up the broken pieces herself. Everyone tried to stop her, but she was too scared to hear them. She was trying to fix her mistake, but then someone grabbed her hand. Esselmund calmly repeated that she needed to stop what she was doing. The girl looked at him like he was a freaking ghost. Her older brother pointed to her cut and said she was bleeding. Finn rushed over to the girl and was shocked to see the cut. She suggested they get back to her room quick, while the rest of the family was still stunned. Esselmund was the only one who looked at her with ice-cold calm. On the way to her room, Finn asked her about breaking that plate. She saw the girl wasn't feeling well and opened the doors. Violet didn't answer, just collapsed on the floor as another wave of nausea hit her. She couldn't figure out why she kept running into the same damn problem. She said she didn't want to eat anymore, unaware the Marquise was secretly watching. Violet said she was always stressed about screwing things up. Finn gave the girl a gentle hug and told her everything would be all right. The girl started crying, not understanding why she only ever showed her worst side. She froze when Finn announced the master's arrival. The saint froze, realizing he'd been watching the whole thing. His face was grim, and he couldn't bring himself to say a word. His gaze locked with the saint's own strained expression. He also spotted the puddle of puke she'd left behind her. The guy said she could eat alone if it was too much for her. The saint just nodded guiltily and lowered her eyes. After that, the Marquise practically bolted out of the room. Even though she wanted the same thing, it stung to think they didn't want to see her anymore. That very day, the girl was scheduled to have her first lesson. Adela Iskander politely greeted the messenger of God. Violet immediately noticed how graceful she was. Adela said she was already on one knee, waiting for an answer. The girl was so nervous, she even forgot what she was supposed to say. The woman explained that no one stands until she gives the order. She asked if Violet had been making the marquee, and others break protocol before. Violet tried to apologize, but Adela called it an act of willfulness. She added that a saint shouldn't let her humble origins be a weakness. She demanded Violet straighten her back and strike a confident pose. Adela kept tearing into the saint over every little thing. She even ripped on the girl for not healing her own wounds. Violet started to ask again, but the woman cut her off. She repeated her question, asking why Violet hadn't used her healing powers. The girl froze when Adela asked if she was just trying to get attention that way. The woman sounded disappointed when she heard Violet didn't know how to heal. Finally, they got down to the lesson, and Violet felt totally worthless. Adela drilled the girl for hours straight, right up until sunset. Violet tried her damnedest to force herself to heal. She doubted she was a saint, until Finn reminded her about snack time. The maid smiled as she watched the little kid. The girl dug into her dessert and asked if she could eat with everyone if she learned etiquette. When she heard the yes, she said there was still so much to learn. She was worried if she'd even be herself after learning all this stuff. She stepped into another world, and now she has to become someone else. She used to be a commoner, but now she's at the top of the food chain. Now all she's worried about is whether she'll still be herself after this journey. Finn suddenly told her she shouldn't be talking about things like that. The saintess gazed thoughtfully at her maid. She was afraid of the way people's eyes didn't change when they talked to her. For a few days, she lived quietly, like she didn't even exist. From now on, she ate alone and practiced when the Viscountess came. She'd also take Finn out for walks, whenever she felt cooped up in her room. Recently, the Viscountess started piling on the pressure after finding out she couldn't read. The girl glanced at a butterfly, wondering if she was actually getting any better. Adrian suddenly asked if she was deliberately not healing her hand. Violet jumped, startled, not even realizing when he'd shown up. Adrian grabbed her hand and asked her how much it hurt. It seemed weird to him that glass cuts hadn't healed after a few days. He towered over her, surprised to see a kid. He figured she'd be different from them, being from a lower class, but she wasn't. The boy asked why she wasn't eating with them anymore. He kept asking questions, but she just clammed up. He was about to bail, because her silence was a total turnoff. Adrian froze like a caught-in-the-act cat when Daniel popped up behind him. Scared of getting reamed, he immediately hid behind the Holy Violet. Daniel sighed like he was beat, then greeted the god's rep. She told him he didn't need to drop to his knees for her. Daniel was surprised, but still gave her a soft smile. He apologized for having to cut out for a bit. He walked up to Adrian and said he'd released a bunch of centipedes onto his clothes. Daniel asked, all scary-like, if he really wanted to be the youngest kinslayer ever. Adrian immediately started making excuses, saying it wasn't what it looked like. Daniel just told him to go do his damn homework. No sooner did he scold his brother than the kid bolted back to the palace. Violet was surprised when he said she was actually changing. He got bummed, guessing she didn't like him using her first name, but she reassured him. He cracked up when she called him Master. Daniel said she was his little sister now, and asked if she was still gonna call him Master. She got flustered when he added that he should be calling her Lady. He liked her reaction, so he added that they shouldn't use titles at all. He also suggested she call him Brother, or just Daniel. She was thrown by how chill he was with someone from her background. He gently stroked his sister's hair, making it a magical moment. Seeing him smile so warmly and openly was new to her. She froze when he asked if all this was too much for her. She couldn't answer, not until tears started streaming down her face. Daniel immediately apologized, saying he didn't mean to make her cry. He stroked her hair again and said he should have come sooner. His tenderness only made her cry harder, like he was melting her soul. Everything she'd bottled up just seemed to melt away when he asked how she was doing. She felt accepted for the first time and decided to learn more about him. Her question made Finn wonder if they'd ever actually met. She mentioned that she'd also met Esselmund's older brother. She agreed when Finn asked if he was a good guy. Finn said Daniel was the one most like their late mother. He's a top student and does tons for the country, way beyond what adults can do. Finn heard he used to be weak before she came to the palace. She sighed, thinking about who would look after that troublemaker if not for Daniel. The saintess smiled, thinking about how amazing her brother was. Finn was happy that she was finally getting interested in things back home. Actually, Violet was always interested, but she just couldn't bring herself to ask. With those thoughts, the girl started getting ready for bed. As she lay in bed, she decided to ask about her older brother. For some reason, his cold attitude kind of freaked her out. Finn tucked her in and said he was the one most like the Marquise. The Ermengarde family is known for training the army for the royal sword. Violet had already heard about that during her lesson with the Viscountess. Esselmund was seen as the family's future heir, and he had to live up to it. This year, he even got accepted into the Royal Knights Order. It was crazy impressive that he'd accomplished so much at 15. St. Violet was amazed at how driven the guy was. His coldness freaked her out, but she still remembered how warm his hands were. Staring out the window, she wondered if he was actually a good guy. The next morning, the Marquis showed up at Count Raisil's mansion. Count Raisil was going on about how there can't be two suns in the sky. The Marquis was turning that phrase over and over in his mind. He could be talking about the king and the pope, or the pope and the saint. The pope's got the highest rank, and God's representative can't be equals. The saint was a being that neither the pope nor the king could even greet. Count Raisil added that he still couldn't figure out what the duke was planning. He asked the Marquis if the pope had tried to contact him secretly. The Marquis shot it down and was shocked the temple wouldn't even talk to them. The count backed him up, saying the temple should be begging the saint for a deal. Suddenly, he wondered if the saint would even be useful to his majesty. Duke Tigernan sent a telegram saying he's coming here because of the saint. But he still hasn't shown up and is still hiding what he really wants. It's unclear if it's the pope's orders or if he's doing this on his own. The count understood why the current king hated the temple so much. He was about to say that at this rate, they'll end up like the last king. The Marquis wearily closed his eyes, realizing his assumptions were right. He had a feeling that this whole thing was just going to keep playing out. For a century, with no saint around, the church crumbled right under the Pope and Duke's noses. Over time, people turned away from the church because of the corruption, and King Astor saw his chance. Then the Pope declared the king was growing obsessed with Malum, pointing to the natural disasters as proof. Even when the plague ravaged the kingdom, the church did jack squat to help. Only after all hell broke loose did the Pope finally send priests to help the people. Word is, the Duke's supposed to put the half-brother, Tigernan, on the throne. Accused of being demon-possessed, the king only had one way out. He was totally crushed and dethroned by the church. Just like that, the clergy grabbed all the power back. A saint can't exist away from the church. That's why the king's sweating bullets. That's exactly why letting the saint out was so risky. Her very existence is a roadblock to the king's vision of complete faith. They were dealing with this issue right up until the earl's daughter showed up. The guy instantly started baby-talking to his precious little girl. The marquise couldn't believe a whole country's chancellor could be so soft. The earl turned to Sisu and told her to greet the marquise. The girl immediately hopped off the couch and went to the man. Sisuela bowed right away and greeted the marquise. The man greeted her back and patted her head. Seeing her smile at the touch, he remembered Violet. The little girl ran up to her dad and told him she was starving. She kissed her father when she heard he was making her a pancake cake. They asked the marquise how the Eye of the Storm was doing at his place. He also asked about those cream buns they sent for the saint. They were completely shocked when they found out she threw up. The marquis sighed wearily and said her taste was even worse than he thought. The count figured it must be tough for the saint to survive in a place like this with all these men. Sisu said she wanted to see the saint too, even if she was just a commoner. The girl believed there was nothing wrong with ordinary people. The marquis calmly watched the sweet conversation between the dad and his daughter. So, he decided to get advice from a little girl to earn the saint's trust. He asked her what little girls liked the most. That same day, Violet got a whole stack of bright, colorful dresses. She was super excited that they bought all that stuff just for her. She really appreciated the marquise's attention and care. She happily agreed to try on the dresses, and then got a ton of compliments. Finn was blown away by how beautiful the young noble lady looked. She said she'd bring her some tea before the Viscountess arrived. The saint started staring at herself in the mirror, not believing it was her. She couldn't figure out why the Marquis decided to buy her all this stuff. Violet spun around as the strict teacher showed up. The woman bowed, but her eyes locked onto the flashy girl. She cut right to it, asking what the heck she was wearing. Hearing the Marquis bought it, Adela tried to guess how much it cost. She asked if she even knew why he'd bought it for her. She agreed when the holy woman said she had to work even harder. The woman added that she needed to become worthy of the dress. Adela suggested practicing her walk again, even though they hadn't covered that yet. The woman plopped down on the couch, looking annoyed, and told her to hurry up. Violet tried to mimic what the Viscountess expected. The woman bit her lip, annoyed, and snapped at the girl. She grabbed a whip and said she didn't expect her to be this dense. She pierced the saintess with a look, judging how slow she was to learn. The girl trembled as she ordered her to lift her skirt. The Viscountess watched every flicker of pain on the girl's face. Again and again, she lashed out, hitting the girl's shins. The Viscountess suggested they practice table manners again. And so, she tormented the saintess until the sun went down. She said she'd tell the marquise that she'd been physically disciplined. Finally, she gave the girl a heavy, scornful look. "Does this fancy dress even look good on me?" she asked. The Viscountess said she was ashamed and told her to keep those scars hidden. The saintess nodded, but got reamed out even for that simple gesture. The girl quickly corrected herself and agreed with the teacher. Finally, she was alone after that endless torture session. Her shins were covered in angry, bloody welts. The girl figured she'd gotten an even worse beating today. She told herself it was okay, since Old Goat used to beat her way worse. She decided to go for a walk to clear her head. Her shins were killing her, but she was wondering if she'd run into Daniel. She couldn't say he hit her, but he always told her she was getting better. The saint was lost in thought until she noticed her wildcard brother. She wanted to slip away quick, but he spotted her immediately. He started mocking her again, asking if she was wearing something that didn't suit her today. He recoiled in surprise when she said she already knew that. She got all gloomy and said she was well aware it didn't look good on her. After that, she clenched her fists in anger and walked away from her brother. He thought she was a bore, then noticed her unusual way of walking. The girl hurriedly sat down on a bench, thinking about Daniel. She knew where his room was, but she felt awkward going to see him. She wanted to go home, because her legs were killing her, but she shook it off. The girl looked up and just happened to spot this male bird. He was singing his own praises, bragging about how hot and awesome he was. He hit on some chick flying by, asking her to lay an egg for him. Violet just watched the bird mating ritual, totally bummed. She couldn't figure out why her power only worked in weird situations, so she quietly bailed. She decided to try checking out the church and see what's up. Violet was surprised there was even a big church here. She figured she'd just take a peek and head back to her room. Up ahead was this massive staircase, just screaming shin splints. At first, she was freaked out, because everything felt so new and weird. Before she knew it, she was standing right in front of some wooden doors. She froze solid when she saw this scary-ass look from something she didn't recognize. She thought it was a ghost and totally ate it, falling to the ground in terror. Can you believe it? Turns out it was just her older brother standing there. She apologized, still not believing she'd screwed up so badly again. He just walked up to her and asked if she was doing okay. The girl tried to get up, but her skirt was making it hard to stand properly. He figured she'd hurt her leg, but she said that wasn't it. She was worried he'd think she was a total idiot for being so weak. Esselman demanded to know why she couldn't get up. Violet felt flustered, not knowing the best way to answer that. She didn't expect him to just hike up her skirt and check out her leg himself. The girl tried to cover her scarred legs, feeling all kinds of ashamed. She saw his intense gaze and couldn't figure out if he was pissed or what. He said, cold as ice, that he just wanted to examine her wound. The saintess was still stunned by how casually he'd lifted her hem. Guess she'd forgotten he could find out what happened to her. The guy's face darkened when he saw the mark from the Viscountess's training. He froze, while the saintess kept trying to hide her face in shame. The second he brought up the wound, it hit her. She remembered what she was hiding. She tried to cover it up, but he grabbed her ankle. Esselmund asked her why she was suddenly apologizing. The girl just said she'd gone where she wasn't supposed to. She added that she was also sorry for being taken in, and then still messing up. She looked down, figuring she was doing a terrible job. Esselmund looked away as she kept making excuses. She bit her lip, feeling hurt when he said the dress didn't suit her yet. He told her to tell the maid to put those things away for later. He also asked why she was wandering around, and she said she wanted to see Daniel. Esselmund just silently scooped her up to ease the pain. The girl started getting anxious and begged him to put her down. She promised to behave and said she shouldn't be in his arms like this. He just replied that there was nothing weird about a brother carrying his sister. She knew he was right, but she still felt embarrassed. Esselmund just said flatly to leave things as they were. With that, he carried the girl back to the palace. Meanwhile, back at the palace, all hell broke loose because the saintess went missing. The servants lowered their heads guiltily and announced that they had arrived. Esselmund got pissed and ordered them to fetch the saintess's personal maid. The girl woke up, surprised when he said he'd carry her to her room. The saintess immediately picked up on the tense vibe among the servants. A couple of minutes later, her older brother carried her to her room and laid her on the couch. Violet followed his orders, but still worried about breaking protocol. She instantly straightened up when the butler brought Finn in. Looks like they could see the bruises on her legs even from way over there. Finn clammed up, scared. When she realized why she was called in, the saintess froze when her brother asked if their father knew about this. She couldn't believe the problem was her injury, not that she was getting scolded. Violet didn't get why, because to her, this was totally normal. The butler turned to Esselmund, racking his brain about who could have done this. He questioned Finn, but she said she had absolutely no clue what happened. Her voice shook as she started begging for forgiveness. Even Adrian came running because of all the noise they were making. He was even more shocked when he saw the wounds on the girl's legs. His older brother threatened to discipline him if he didn't stop calling the saint names like that. The boy immediately got scared and clamped his mouth shut, afraid of getting punished. Looks like Finn's reaction only pissed off the older brother even more. He ripped into her for neglecting her duties and being incompetent. She started trembling as he began thinking about what exactly he should accuse her of. The way this dude was glaring, it froze her blood solid. She knew she was in deep trouble and tried to talk her way out of it. The saint was just as surprised, because he always seemed so chill before. Still, everyone around them instantly got tense when he lost his temper. She was shaking, thinking she'd never seen anyone this terrifying. Esselmund added that there was no way she could be clueless about all this. He questioned the skills of someone who screwed up this badly. Violet wasn't about to let him hurt her maid. She stood up and begged him not to punish Finn. She was limping, but she kept begging him for mercy. Violet tried to get through to him, but he was a brick wall. He ordered the butler to pay her triple wages for everything she'd worked. He shut it down, saying she should get severance pay too. The girl couldn't believe he decided to kick out innocent Finn. Esselmund said he was filling in for his father and had all the same power. He added that there was nothing she could do about it. Violet suddenly realized he never intended to listen to her in the first place. Her soul was torn by the pitiful sobs of the woman who was like a mom to her. She mentally apologized to the innocent maid. The girl froze as the maid's gaze turned to her. The girl glared at her with raw contempt and hatred, like she blamed her for everything. That look was familiar, and she never thought she'd see it again. It sent shivers down her spine, a pain she knew all too well. Even now, Violet was trying to excuse her, thinking she was just angry. The butler stepped in front of the maid and ordered her to follow him. Finn stared at him with a mix of hope and loathing, like her entire future was gone. In her mind, she cursed the saint she envied and served. Meanwhile, Violet was frantically trying to figure out how to get her back. She couldn't let Finn leave, and she collapsed to the floor. The next moment, she broke down sobbing, as loud and hard as she could. Adrian tried to calm her down, but her hysterical sobbing just wouldn't stop. Violet was ready to go to extremes. Anything to clear Finn's name. Adrian was pissed that everyone bailed and left him to deal with this. He started distracting the kid, blowing air on her face to try and soothe her. He promised he'd try talking to his dad, just to get her to stop crying. The saintess looked at the boy, realizing she'd gotten what she wanted. The boy added that everything would be all right if he talked to his father. The girl actually stopped when he told her to quit crying already. Adrian, like a total gentleman, moved next to her and patted her back. The next day, Viscountess Candor was summoned to the Marquis's office. She denied her evil deeds, but the Marquis said the maid confessed everything. The Viscountess claimed she was just trying to discipline the girl. She added that the saint had been studying for so long, she had no choice. The woman also brought up dresses, implying the girl didn't understand their worth. The Marquis said she was insulting the saint with such venomous words. She trembled when he threatened she'd lose her status if the Pope or Duke found out the truth. She understood the risk, but still thought the saint was just a myth. It stung her that her illegitimate daughter was ignored because they couldn't afford proper clothes. Envy boiled inside her because the saint was treated differently. The Marquis gave her hope, saying he'd ask a single question. He made it clear he wasn't going to forget how she treated his daughter. From now on, her whole family's banned from every inch of his land. The Viscountess freaked. Her husband wasn't supposed to find out about any of this. She knew she was done for the second the Marquis told her to get out. She was furious that he even made that commoner girl his daughter in the first place. Her blood ran cold when she saw the terrifying look in his eyes. She thought he was just a naive softy, but he was downright intimidating. The Viscountess realized she was looking at someone worthy of being called the King's Sword. The woman left, accepting her complete and utter defeat. Once he was alone, the Marquis immediately got down to business. He was calmly going through his usual paperwork. He had to pick a new tutor for the saintess again, but he left it to the Earl. Meanwhile, the saintess was just waking up. She was surprised to see a maid she didn't recognize standing there. Violet jumped up and asked where Finn was. The young girl just silently shook her head. That gesture made the saintess think that Finn really had been kicked out. The maid saw tears welling up in her eyes and said she was sure she'd like it here. She introduced herself as Anne and asked Violet to be less formal with her. Anne was thrilled by how cute the girl was, but she kept a straight face. Out of nowhere, she asks the girl if she's really that uncomfortable. The girl blurts out that she wants to get closer to the lady. She smiles sweetly and says they'll try to become friends now. Violet's listening, but she's still finding it hard to trust. Anne was trying everything to cheer her up and gain her trust. The girl pauses, then asks if the Viscountess is coming today. Anne almost called the Viscountess a dumbass and said she wasn't coming back. Violet was surprised to hear that Countess Racel herself would be teaching her now. The poor kid immediately thought that she'd be even scarier than the Viscountess. Anne tells her not to worry, saying the Countess is really thoughtful. The maid was again asking her to drop the formalities. Anne was stoked that Violet was actually listening to her. She squeezed her hands, telling her everything would be all right. The maid grinned and suggested they take a little walk. Violet was taken aback by her energy, but agreed anyway. After a while, they bumped into a spooked-looking Adrian. Turns out, Anne was giving a tour of the palace rooms. The maid playfully roasted Adrian about his rough way of talking. The saint was surprised by how freely Anne just spilled everything. They kept going until they somehow ended up in the kitchen. Anne was stoked to show her the spot where they were cooking up a brand new masterpiece. Jack greeted Anne's energetic maid with a smile. He was blown away seeing the saint, which totally fired him up. The guy rushed over to Violet and bowed. She tried to tell him he didn't need to do that, but he wasn't budging. She insisted he stand up, after which he decided to show his respect another way. He held out a little cake he'd managed to whip up. He spent ages figuring out what she'd like, and decided to use figs. Violet had definitely eaten figs before, since they grew everywhere. She quickly tasted the cake and felt pure bliss. Jack and Anne were stoked she was digging everything so much. The dude promised to whip up tons more sweets. Anne suggested finishing off the leftover cake in her room after the tour. The kid was in, and they headed to the dining hall. No sooner did Anne say she'd be eating there with everyone soon, than the saint freaked. She said she's just a commoner, not a real daughter. The maid got bummed out and asked if Adrian was giving her a hard time. The girl shook her head, saying she just didn't want to look at any of those people. She shocked the maid by saying she didn't want to see the First Lord either. She knew it wasn't his fault, but she hated the people who kicked Finn out. Violet understood how crucial those jobs were for regular folks. Even so, the First Master just heartlessly kicked out that maid. He coldly blew off both Violet's pleas and Finn's words. Anne was trying to explain that the Master's actually a good guy. Violet wanted to believe it, but he was completely different with her. Anne couldn't help but wonder what he did to deserve that awful hair. The saint wondered if Anne was going to get in trouble for conversations like this. The maid took the girl's hands and suggested they go somewhere else. They kept wandering around the palace, not knowing they'd run into the Marquise. Anne was deliberately trying to show her where the Marquise's office was. She grew up with Esselman since she was a kid and was a super reliable maid. The Marquis thought the saint would stay put, but Anne was totally on top of things. The guy stopped and gave the saint a courteous hello. The girl froze. feeling all these conflicting emotions kicking around inside her. The next second, she was shaking with anger and bolted off that way. Anne gave the Marquis a quick bow and took off after her. The Marquis sighed, worn out, and figured the swelling in his foot must be down. Not long before this, Adrian was trying to beg forgiveness for Finn. He was saying how Violet was sobbing her eyes out, like a little kid. Adrian asked for the maid back, but the Marquis shot him down flat. These events made him think the girl straight up hated his guts. She had no clue Finn was getting paid off by the Viscountess to keep quiet. He knew there was no way the Saintess would buy that, even if he told her. The Marquis was staring out the window when he caught a glimpse of something from his past. Before she died, his wife said he'd be less of a hard-ass if they'd had a daughter. He just smiled, held the umbrella over her, and watched. All his sons were total opposites and needed him to be tough. He figured a sweet daughter might have made him a more positive dude. His wife, who wanted a daughter so bad, died just 5 years ago. He felt like if she were still around, she would have loved Violet like her own. In that moment, the Marquis realized he was totally failing at this parenting thing. He knew he was seriously going to need Countess Reisel's help. Meanwhile, the Saint was still booking it away from the maid. Anne chased after her, not even sure if she was driven by anger or just plain hurt. The girl figured Finn got the boot just because she was getting beat up. Finally, she was worn out and tried to catch her breath after that sprint. Anne gently wiped the sweat off her face and asked how she was doing. Despite the kindness, Violet still just saw her as a replacement. Still, she was so nice, it was impossible to stay mad at her. The maid calmly asked her what made her run off like that. No way was she going to admit she hated the Marquise. She snapped her head up, hearing a familiar voice from way off. Standing right there, looking worried sick, was Daniel, like an angel compared to everyone else. Without a word, the heartbroken girl just collapsed into his arms. She clung to him, feeling the warmth of his gentle touch. He turned to Anne and told her he'd take her back to her room himself. Daniel apologized to the Saint for not knowing about the beatings. She told him it was okay, since she hadn't said anything. The boy asked, all worried, if she could even walk. He was the only one who could understand how she felt about that maid. She figured he could get through to the Marquise and help out. But Daniel just shook his head, looking guilty. He knew his dad and brother were the kind who'd never back down from their word. Even Ed, at 15, was a stone-cold, unflappable dude. He patted her head and told her it was okay to cry it out. No sooner had he said he was on her side than tears started welling up. She thought his whole vibe was just radiating light. That evening, she dolled herself up to start her lessons. The moment the Countess looked surprised, she started stressing about her curtsy. The Countess just worried she had nothing to teach her. She greeted the Saint with a sweet smile and suggested they get started. Violet just shyly looked away and agreed. She secretly hoped she wouldn't get hit, at least not today. They were studying a new element, and she messed up. The Countess gently touched the girl's chin. She softly adjusted the girl's posture and told her how to better hold her chin. Every instruction was gentle and clear, so the girl immediately understood what to do. Violet was surprised by how the Countess praised her after every success. She encouraged the Saint, saying how well she was doing. The Countess suggested they have lunch, and then move on to studying table manners. Just the sound of those words sent shivers down the Saint's spine. Countess Reisel decided to jump right into the basics with hands-on practice. She knew all about the Saint's issues and felt deeply for her. She told the girl not to worry, and that she'd set her straight. Mealtime was Violet's biggest weakness, and it always made her anxious. She froze the second she heard the Countess's first instruction. She apologized, but the woman just smiled at her mistake. The Saint hung on every word her new teacher said. She started to panic when she felt herself gripping the knife too tight. And then, she accidentally dropped the knife on the floor. Countess Reisel was taken aback when the Saintess stood up and lowered her head. She said she was ready to take whatever punishment was coming for her mistake. The Countess was floored that the Saintess was expecting to get beaten. She asked if the Viscountess really raised her like that. The Saintess squeezed her eyes shut, terrified she was about to get smacked. To her surprise, Countess Reisel just gently hugged the poor girl. The woman told her to calm down and said she wasn't going to hit her. She promised there would never be any violence between them. Her genuine, sympathetic look gave her the confidence that she wouldn't be beaten. The Countess smiled and told her to hurry up and sit down at the table. The Saint tried again, and finally, she nailed it. Because of how she did it, the girl got comfortable and way more confident. With the woman's gentle care, her skills started to skyrocket. With that kind of support, she felt like everything was finally going her way. Then, like 2 whole seasons went by, and winter hit. The Countess pointed out that it looked like it might snow soon. The girl couldn't believe it had been so long since she first got here. The Countess noticed that something had caught the Saint's eye. Violet confessed that her birthday was in a week. That simple sentence immediately darkened their expressions. A couple of days went by, and the vibe in the house shifted even more. Ever since that day, the servants had been running around the mansion like crazy. She was really thrown by how worked up everyone seemed to be. She didn't even get why Anne told her to put on such a fancy dress. On her birthday, it just didn't feel like her style at all. Violet froze when Anne led her to these massive doors. Finally, the maid smiled and wished her a happy 11th birthday. This was the first time anyone had put this much effort into celebrating her birthday. The moment the doors swung open, she saw this dazzling hall. The girl just couldn't believe they did all of this for her. Anne said everyone was here to celebrate her birthday. Usually, the saint's birthday was celebrated across the whole kingdom, starting from when she turned 16. Even so, the Marquis still decided to throw a proper celebration. Violet still felt doubtful about the guy. She figured he'd use it as a chance to test everything she'd learned. Even Jack baked a huge strawberry cake for her. All the ladies there were congratulating the saint with smiles. They crowded around her, saying how much they wanted to meet her. The girl thanked them, still not believing they actually came for her. Violet turned around when she heard some familiar guys' voices. The Marquis's two sons appeared before her, stunning everyone with their looks. Daniel smiled sweetly and wished her a happy birthday. He complimented her, saying the dress perfectly suited her name. Daniel added that she'd mastered etiquette and become a true lady. Violet felt a wave of relief that she hadn't messed anything up. Adrian, being Adrian, grumbled that he couldn't get any fencing practice in. He asked why he even had to celebrate someone else's birthday. Imagine his surprise when he was told to go to his fencing lessons. He asked, "What?" in disbelief, which made Anne burst out laughing. The girl added he didn't have to stick around if he didn't want to celebrate her birthday. He was so ashamed, he bolted for the exit like a shot. Violet froze when the adults started heading their way. The Marquise was walking with the Racel couple. The instructor introduced her to her good-natured husband. The Marquise joined in on congratulating the young saint. Violet still didn't get why he'd put all this on for her. She also spotted Earl Racel staring at her, clearly impressed. To her surprise, the Marquis suddenly stepped in front of her, blocking her view. The Earl immediately asked him to move, saying he wanted to get a look at her. But no matter how much he pleaded, the Marquise wouldn't budge. The guy kept calling out to the saint, trying to get her to come out. Violet looked at the Marquis, surprised when he refused. The Earl tried to bring his daughter, but it didn't work out. The saint didn't get why the man was smiling so deviously. The Earl dramatically raised his hands and announced it was gift time. He was going to have a servant deliver it, but decided to give it himself. The girl was super stoked about getting such a huge gift. She thanked the Earl right away, even though she had no clue what was inside. Daniel gave her a nudge, saying he was curious to see what it was too. As soon as she opened the box, she was holding a teddy bear. She was geeking out like a kid over this huge fluffy toy. Before, she couldn't even touch toys, because her family was broke. She remembered that one toy she got turned down for, and realized this bear was even bigger. Everyone there was blown away when all the colorful decorations burst into bloom. The Countess got to see flowers blooming right in front of her eyes. It suddenly hit her. The Saintess was using her powers. Looks like even Violet herself had no clue how she pulled that off. Right away, everyone started showering her with praise for what she'd done. Violet looked up, like she couldn't believe she'd made those flowers bloom. It felt like even the flowers were wishing her a happy birthday. She was cool with it when Anne suggested taking the toy to the room. Daniel backed off the second he spotted that old face. The girl was left alone with the creepy Marquise. She asked if she could go outside for a bit. She thanked him super fast and bolted as soon as he said yes. Violet just bailed, because she felt awkward and didn't know where to go. She was gonna head back to the room, but accidentally overheard some people talking. Turns out those women were trashing her, big time. They were even ragging on them for throwing a fancy birthday party for some nobody. They added that everyone only came for their sons, not for the saint. Their snide remarks crashed down on the girl like an avalanche. She ran ahead, not understanding the reason for all the hypocrisy. It felt unfair that they hated her just because of where she came from. She sobbed, indignant that she had to hear this crap on her birthday. Violet never wanted to be in this position and didn't choose her destiny. Flowers sprouted from her tears, but she didn't want to see anyone. Eventually, she ran outside and just sat down on the ground. Unlike inside the palace, outside the flower garden, no one said she looked stupid. Her silence was broken by a young man, surprised to find her there. He calmly demanded that she get up off the floor. He saw she wasn't responding and gave her hand a little shake. Violet had never seen anyone so gorgeous, like a straight-up angel. She thought he was a woman at first, but he told her he was a dude. Violet instantly felt awkward, but he just laughed it off. The stranger asked her what she was crying about. The girl didn't want to tell him the real reason she was so upset. She was worried he'd start making fun of where she came from too. He said he came specifically to find her, but it bummed him out to see her crying. He added that it made him even sadder when she wouldn't tell him why. Violet didn't get why he looked like he was about to burst into tears, like it happened to him. She looked away, but still confessed the reason she was so down. The girl explained how everyone made fun of her for being dumb and broke. Out of nowhere, the guy hugged her and guessed that she'd been having a rough time. She started crying when he asked if it was hard for her to live like this. He told her the world was full of happiness, and she just got a raw deal. The girl shot that down and said the world was full of just plain bad luck. She brought up all her sisters, who were seriously unlucky in life. Violet started checking her companion out again. She still couldn't believe a guy could be that good-looking. She got embarrassed when she realized he'd caught her staring. He turned away and asked if she missed him too. The guy said he missed her like crazy, like he knew something she didn't. He stopped halfway there and added that he'd been waiting for her a long time. Violet froze, not understanding why she was only just noticing this now. It was the first time she'd paid attention to his clothes, like a priest's robes. He looked at her and said he'd come to find her, plain and simple. He added that he didn't care about where she came from and wouldn't hurt her. Finally, he held out his hand and offered to walk with him. Looks like he managed to gain her trust and make a good impression. She was about to leave, but the Marquise's eldest son beat her to it. Violet froze, totally stunned as a blade appeared right next to her. Esselman's sword was pointed directly at the mystery dude. He demanded, cold as ice, that the guy identify himself. The unknown punk just kept smirking, staring him right in the eye. Looks like he wasn't planning on lowering that sword until he got an answer. Violet dropped to the floor, feeling her strength drain away from the fear. The kid said he was just a priest passing through. Ed called him out for trying to be funny, cause his words sounded more like a taunt. The guy said he was expecting to see King Tiggernan, son of Ermengarde. The saint went still, racking her brain, trying to remember who he was talking about. Her older brother said he wasn't on the guest list. The guy smirked and asked what he was supposed to do now, seeing as how he was already there. He added with menace that touching him wouldn't go unpunished. Violet was stunned by how fast his whole demeanor changed. Esselman lowered his sword, declaring that the holy woman belonged to his clan. Nevertheless, the priest kept sticking to his guns. He said he doubted everyone else felt the same way they did. He smiled again, walking over to the girl sitting on the floor. The young man gently squeezed her hand and told her there were going to be repercussions. He pulled her to her feet and said next time she should take his hand. Before he left, the stranger softly kissed her palm. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. As soon as they were alone, Ed asked if her father had warned her. Violet spun around, realizing he might be seriously pissed. It was obvious that if she'd taken that guy's hand, the Marquise would have lost it. The memory of her sister's deaths flashed through her mind again. Ed called out, saying if she still wanted to be here, they were at her service. Violet didn't want to go back, afraid of what everyone would say. She turned away, deciding she didn't want to return to that house. The girl went downstairs, wondering if there was even one genuine person at her party. Ed leaned over her and asked if she wanted to make all the flowers in the garden bloom. She was stunned, seeing the garden in such full bloom before her. The girl couldn't believe her power had burst out of her again, completely on its own. Violet's jaw dropped, just taking in all the beauty. Ed told her she wasn't wasting her kindness for nothing. The girl gave her headstrong brother a searching look. She couldn't help but wonder if he even realized how much his careless words stung. She just got angry again at everything he said and took off his coat. He started to say she'd catch a cold, but she wasn't having it. Ed suddenly asked if she regretted not going with the priest. She just screamed out of nowhere, saying she actually did regret it. You could tell she poured every ounce of anger and resentment she had into those words. Now she figured she really should have gone with him back then. She had no clue about his real reasons. She thought he was a total saint. Right now, she was just thrown by the fact her older brother was following right behind her. She had to stop when his hand grabbed her around the waist. Violet started yelling, telling him to let her go, but he wasn't budging. He just kept staring at the flowers like nothing was happening. A dazzling flower garden appeared in front of them. He kept holding on to the girl and said the gardener was going to have a tough time. Violet spat out that she hated him more than anyone. She even said she hated his politeness, but that just pissed him off. He pinned her and told her he wouldn't let her get away and run to the temple. Ed said he was sick of her childish crap, and she should at least respect their father. Looks like that got her thinking about how she was acting. She mentally called herself an idiot for ever seeing him as a prince. Violet felt weirded out by the way he treated people like burdens. She felt even more ashamed that he kept walking forward with her. After what felt like forever, they finally got back to the palace. Anne looked relieved to see the sulking girl back in bed. She tried to find out why her eyes were red, but the saint refused to go to the party. Anne immediately started talking about how hard the Marquis worked to throw it. Violet hid under the covers and said she never asked him to do that. Even though she was upset, she wondered if Anne was going to get punished. She didn't want her to get hurt, so she climbed out from under the covers. She asked the maid, annoyed, why she was laughing. Violet admitted she was mad at Ed for grabbing her like a sack of potatoes. Anne was laughing so hard her stomach started to hurt. She replied that the master was really rushing to put such a party together. The maid recalled all the preparations they managed to get done. Looks like her words actually got through to the hurt little saint. Anne suggested she fake being sick, so she'd have an excuse to be absent. She added that otherwise, Violet might get punished. Finally, Violet drifted off, waiting for the Marquise to find her sick. One look at the kid, and he knew she was faking it. Anne confessed that she was the one who told her to do it. The maid said the saint had a fight with her brother and came crying. At first, he thought it was Adrian, but it turned out to be Lord Ed. The Marquis was surprised to hear Esselmond had a fight with a kid. Anne tried to reconstruct what they talked about. The guy frowned, seeing the way Ed was carrying the saintess. He couldn't figure out why it had put her in such a bad mood. The maid immediately started guessing what could have ticked the girl off. The Marquis agreed, saying Ed had screwed up big time. He went silent and looked again at the sleeping girl. The guy quietly knelt down next to her to get a good look at his daughter. It made him smile seeing her sleeping it off after making a whole garden bloom. Now he knew for sure that this girl was the real deal, a saintess. Seeing flowers bloom in winter was mind-blowing for him. Everyone there was blown away by the genuine miracle. Besides the invited guests, there were some uninvited ones too. The old man showed up. Turns out he's the Don's right-hand man. Anne bowed and explained that the saint was feeling under the weather and couldn't make it. He figured it was just an excuse, but there was nothing he could do about it. The Marquis was relieved that Anne showed up when she did. They couldn't let the Duke catch even a glimpse of Violet. He used to think faking sick was low, but now he saw things differently. He snapped back to reality when Anne's maid addressed him. She held out a teddy bear to him, and he told her to set it down next to him. The next morning, the saint discovered the bear had changed. She couldn't figure out why the green ribbon had turned purple. Seeing the girl's confusion, Anne told her she needed to wash up quick. Before you knew it, the girl was completely changed. Anne smiled, seeing the girl wouldn't let go of her toy for a second. The girl went to answer, but the Marquise walked in, cutting her off. He pretended to buy her lie and asked her how she was feeling. She agreed, then heard that her immense power had even surprised Duke Tiggernon. The saintess didn't get why he'd shown up at the celebration. She also wasn't sure if she should tell him about that priest boy. After thinking it all over, she shook her head thoughtfully. The Marquis couldn't help but notice the change in the toy. He decided to switch gears and asked if she liked it. He made her day, telling her she could keep it as long as she wanted. The Marquis felt a wave of relief seeing her smile, because he thought she hated his guts. The girl grinned genuinely and thanked him for letting her have it. The man smiled softly, wanting to burn this moment into his memory. Later that day, the girl was scheduled for tutoring with Countess Rysel. The woman said she was super worried when she heard she'd passed out. No wonder she was exhausted. She did tear up the whole garden after all. Even the nobles who were pissed about the ball being canceled were speechless with delight. On top of all that, the Marquis handed out some flowers, and the guests left happy. The Countess went on to say that flowers in winter are an unspeakable luxury. She gave her irises and said they were proof of God's love. The girl thoughtfully squeezed the flower in her hands, thinking about God's love. It suddenly occurred to her that if he existed, he'd be like that young guy. She couldn't believe Ed dared point a sword at someone like that. The girl still didn't understand her weird brother's motives. She clenched her fists and decided she was going to study hard today. And with that, they finally got down to lessons. The Countess decided to read her a book about how great a saint's power is. She asked if I knew the stories about Malam's first coming and the saint. Her name was Aggression, and an entire kingdom was named after her victory. Violet remembered being read that legend a lot as a kid. The Countess asked if I'd ever heard of the previous saint, Anastasia. The woman smiled and suggested we start with that story. They say she was the most beautiful and closest to God. About 120 years ago, she suddenly vanished, earning her the nickname Saint of Legend. She was born in the Marquis de Hubas's house and awakened her power at the age of 8. Anastasia possessed the most powerful abilities and defeated Malam in record time. On top of that, she also fought off an attack by the heretical Gunnarians. Violet sighed, asking if she really had to defeat Malam too. The Countess nodded with a smile, but the girl could barely picture it. The Countess pointed out the ban that the first king had established. No one was allowed to interfere in the sacred battle between the saint and Malam. The girl was uneasy, knowing all the saints grew up in luxury from a young age. Unlike them, she'd only managed to learn how to read and basic etiquette. Even her name sounded somehow foreign and unworthy. She asked the Countess about the reason for this ban. The woman guessed that he simply wanted to avoid casualties. A wave of panic washed over the girl, and she wondered when Malum would arrive. Records show he always showed up after a saint reached maturity. Violet asked to see a portrait of Saint Anastasia. The Countess sadly replied that not even the temple had one left. It was an order from King Demetrius, the 167th. He was supposedly the grandfather of the current King Triton, but she'd find out more about that later. The Countess told her not to mention any of this around others. She gazed thoughtfully out the window, remembering King Demetrius. It was a real shock to Violet to learn that he'd loved a saint. She strolled through the garden, admiring the gorgeous, fragrant flowers. The king's love for Saint Anastasia became a well-known legend. He was crazy about her, like she was an angel sent from heaven. But he got so mad, he ended up destroying all her portraits and statues. And get this, he lived over 100 years and died whispering her name. The portraits and statues that were left got smashed on the orders of his son, Astor. The girl felt bad about this weird love-hate thing between the saint-obsessed dad and the son who hated her. She looked at the roses, still not believing she'd done all this. Violet froze, standing right in the middle of this massive, amazing garden. She leaned in close, feeling like the scent of the flowers was singing to her. She was so caught up in it, she didn't even notice someone else was there. The Duke walked up and asked her not to bloom so many flowers next time. The girl was caught off guard, trying to figure out when he even got there. She sized up the strange dude in a heartbeat and felt a bad vibe. She didn't know if she should bolt or stick around. Violet froze, asking him point-blank who he was. The guy just smiled silently, staring intently at the holy woman. He hesitated to answer, because he didn't even know what to tell her. He grinned and sheepishly introduced himself as a priest just passing through. The Duke was trying to make a good impression, but Violet wasn't buying it. She doubted he could just randomly show up 2 days in a row. The guy stepped closer, saying he really dug yesterday's miracle. She shivered when he asked if she was tired. The Duke noticed with a predatory gleam that the saintess was wary of him. She just wanted to know if he'd gotten permission from the Marquise. She thought of Daniel. But the Duke said the second son already knew he was coming. He honestly hadn't even expected to actually meet the saintess. He figured they all thought he'd already gone back. Violet was thinking he was different from any priest she'd ever seen. She happened to notice the white flower in his hand was wilting. The girl couldn't figure out why he seemed so damn familiar. She decided to find out and dared to ask his full name. The guy's face darkened, just like the sky above them. And then he introduced himself as Chesure. Violet froze, noticing the strange color of his eyes. She instantly remembered the priest from yesterday with the golden eyes. Besides him, their king also had eyes like that. The girl started to get worried and asked if he had come to take her away. He just smiled and replied that he would do whatever she wanted. He stood still, and some unknown force absorbed the flower in his hand. Violet was amazed at how brightly and beautifully it sparkled. The man smiled and said that she possessed even greater, more noble abilities. He added that she could use her power, but shouldn't bring plants back to life. Chesure was saying it was just the laws of nature. Plants gotta sleep in winter, then wake up in the spring, right? The saint woke up the sleeping plants, so now they gotta go back to sleep. He touched the flowers, calling death a painful process. Chesure wasn't threatening her, but Violet felt this weird emptiness. She turned around and saw how much the clear weather had changed. For the first time, she wondered what a huge mistake she'd made. She used to love the flowers, but now she realized they were dead. Tears welled up in her eyes because of the violation she'd committed. She looked at the flower, saying she didn't mean for any of this to happen. Violet let slip that it happened while she was crying. The guy got pissed knowing she was crying yesterday. Chesure coldly asked who exactly made her cry. She didn't want to name names, but he kept pushing. She admitted she overheard the ladies talking who came yesterday. The girl added that no one would want to visit a commoner in a dump like this. He wiped away her tears and said no one would dare talk to a saint like that. Chesure said they're just liars who don't know what really makes the world tick. Violet froze, catching the soft, rich scent of his cologne. She felt something calming in his loving embrace. He smiled, calling each of her tears precious. Chesure stroked her hair, saying even a single drop of her blood was a miracle from God. He turned and suggested she take a look at the flowers. The girl panicked, realizing her tears had revived the flower again. Chesure just calmly said there was nothing to be afraid of. He added that was exactly why he was there. He snapped his fingers, and holy power was released into the air. In the next instant, it spread throughout the garden, killing the flowers. He smiled amidst the dead garden and said he'd returned everything to the laws of nature. Chesure added that it wouldn't hurt anymore, but she felt terrified. He explained the flower was just sleeping, and they'd see it again in winter. Violet looked down and asked if she'd messed up a lot. He explained the flowers woke up because they missed her. Chesure claimed they went to sleep happy, knowing they had a saint. He added that they were looking forward to seeing her again. Getting no answer, the man told her to go back to the palace. He was surprised when she turned around and asked if she'd see him again. That question made him happy, and he said yes. Chesure pressed his forehead against her head and promised to visit her again. After that, the thoughtful girl went back home. She was still replaying everything that had happened to her lately. Anne rushed to her side like she'd been gone for days. Violet reminded her that she'd said she was going to the garden. Anne confessed she'd forgotten, but was just glad she was back. She looked ahead and saw something that completely floored her. Looks like the other servants noticed it too. The butler squinted, trying to figure out what changed the landscape. Everyone froze, stunned by the sight of that ominous garden. It was just blooming with flowers, but now everything's withered. They all immediately figured the Duke was the only one who could do that. That same rainy evening, the Duke rushed back home. Daniel tried to tell him everything was fine, but he didn't buy it. He only calmed down when he saw Violet sitting on the couch. In that instant, he felt all his anxiety just melt away. Their surprised gazes met without a single word. Daniel immediately rushed to the girl, as if she were an illusion. He showed his father that the Saintess was completely safe. The man just sighed wearily and agreed with his son. The girl couldn't understand why the Marquise had come to see her. The Marquis asked if she'd met any strangers that day. The kid decided to lie, knowing somebody could get hurt if she didn't. She claimed she didn't mess with the flowers and had no idea why they died. The guy could smell the lie on his stepdaughter, but he didn't want to push her. Daniel smirked and asked if a weird guy had approached her. He was caught off guard when they told him to quit talking nonsense. The eldest son said the Saintess was too young to get a lot of stuff. Daniel disagreed and figured Violet understood everything just fine. Ed's face darkened, asking if it didn't matter if the Saintess met the Duke. The girl froze when they started talking about Duke Tagernon again. She thought about the red-haired dude, but he introduced himself as a priest. He also showed off his strength, which made everyone question if he was really a priest. Ed pissed Daniel off by saying he was a coward, not just polite. He argued that their dad would never have let the Duke into their house. The Saintess was confused why Esselmund was only talking to Daniel. She tossed her teddy bear and stood up, realizing she had to protect him. She yelled at the first prince, telling him to stop being a bully. She surprised the guys by adding that he had done everything he could. Violet didn't want to cry, but these two guys were freaking her out. The thought of them taking everything away from her and Daniel now terrified her. The Marquis stepped closer and told her she had gotten the wrong idea. The girl froze, her eyes wide with fear, as she looked at her stern father. Esselmund's defiant glare pressed down on her even harder. He turned away from the girl in disgust, without a single word. The Marquis told Daniel one last thing. He needed to calm the saint down. Then he left them alone, knowing Violet only trusted his son. As if heaven sent, the rain started pouring outside again. Daniel asked her why she said all that stuff, if she was so afraid of them. He got all dark when she explained she just wanted to protect him. She said she wasn't doing it out of kindness, but because she trusted him. The kid smirked, then asked her again to make sure he heard right. The girl turned away, saying he was her precious older brother. Something in his heart skipped a beat when she added he was all she had. A smile returned to his face, and he replied that she was all he had too. She seemed surprised at first, but then the boy's answer made her happy. In the next instant, he dropped to his knees and hugged his little sister tight. The girl realized he might also feel alone, being the only blonde-haired kid around. It struck her that maybe he needed affection and support too. After a couple minutes, she blurted out that she was suffocating from the hug. He looked down, asking if they could stay like that just a little longer. Violet was willing to put up with it, if it made him feel any better. After that day, the Marquis wasn't seen around the estate for a few days. The girl kept going to her lessons, still giving it her all. She was grinding, reading books, and crushing her homework. Violet wasn't great with her letters, but Daniel was helping her study. About 10 days later, the Marquis finally came back to the estate. He gave the girl a brand new, super realistic doll. She was surprised when he said he'd bought it just for her. Violet felt a little awkward, but still thanked her father for the gift. She froze when he asked if she was feeling any better, hinting at her sickness. The girl felt a pang of guilt and told him she was doing better now. The Marquis also confessed that Ed got chewed out for that incident. The guy was convinced that he had acted disrespectfully. He looked away and promised his daughter it wouldn't happen again. The Saintess was glad he put in the effort. He wanted to pat her head, but she got scared again. She thought he'd hit her, but he immediately stopped his hand. The girl looked at the man sitting in front of her, surprised. She saw sadness on his face when he told her to stay at the estate. This was a real shock to the Saintess, since she'd be away from her family. That evening, her brothers came out to escort her. Daniel smiled and asked her to text him when she arrived. He told her not to worry, and that the people there were good folks. Adrian said he didn't need her letters, because her handwriting sucked. He added that if she sent him one, he'd gladly teach her how to write better. Daniel chimed in that his grammar wasn't great either, and Violet might not be able to read his chicken scratch. The kid instantly got pissed, but Anne just happened to be nearby. She decided to take the girl away before this conversation went any further. Violet noticed Ed, who hadn't said a single damn word. She didn't get why he was staring at her like that. Finally, she snapped out of it when she heard them say it was time to go. The girl sadly walked towards the carriage, wondering if she'd ever see this place again. She stared at the mansion, unsure if they'd even let her come back. Violet hesitated, wondering if she should take her brother's hand. Ed just froze up as usual, not saying a damn word. Finally, she took his hand and climbed the steps. Before she left, he said she'd have some time to be alone with herself. Violet was taken aback, thinking about his weird-ass comment. She didn't answer her brother and just left, totally confused. The girl had no idea how long she'd have to be on her own. This was the first time she'd left the mansion since she went to the palace. The saint started thinking the Marquis didn't want to take her under his wing anymore. Anne picked up on her thoughts and asked if she was feeling down about it. She explained that the Marquis was worried about her, so she should lay low. At first, she didn't understand what the maid was getting at. She replied thoughtfully that she'd understand when she was older. Finally, Anne let slip that she'd only be there for, like, 2 months tops. The maid excitedly pointed out that the first snow of the year was falling. Violet did the same and stared intently at the winter wonderland. They were surprised it was coming down so fast and so early. The estate was located up north, where it was way colder. They finally made it to the estate just as night was falling. They were both blown away by how freaking huge the place was. Violet started wondering what they were gonna do with all their time here. Anne wasn't sure, but suggested they keep up with their etiquette lessons. The girl perked up when she was offered a tour of the estate grounds. She figured she'd read a book and write a letter to Daniel after that. Anne felt a wave of relief, knowing the saint was liked around here. She also decided it'd be a good idea to practice her spiritual powers. Violet felt a little lost, since she hadn't really done anything like that before. Anne insisted that learning that skill was totally necessary. She kept talking, but the saintess was lost in thought, tuning everything out. Even as she was trying to sleep, she was still racking her brain about controlling her powers. She knew that eventually, she'd have to live up to her title as the saintess. Violet was worried she wouldn't be able to handle the rest of her duties. A few minutes later, she finally drifted off to sleep. She was surprised to find herself standing in an endless field beneath a vast sky. She looked up and saw a familiar-looking girl standing ahead of her. This stranger looked like a more mature version of Violet herself. The stranger greeted her with a gentle smile and closed her eyes. The stranger said that Violet must be getting stronger if she could see her. The girl didn't say a word and was surprised to feel tears on her cheek. Something made her sad, like her heart was caught in a vice. The woman touched her cheek and asked why she was wiping away the tears so fast. Violet mentioned the priest's words about the resurrected plants. The former saint smiled and asked what happened next. The girl said that he made all the flowers wither again. The saint froze, and the wise smile vanished from her face. Violet squeezed her dress sadly and called herself useless. She still figured God had picked her by mistake. The saint said she was definitely her child, and it hurt to hear her say that. She said to hold out my hands if I doubted my power. The girl did as she asked, then closed her eyes. The woman told her to focus on her strength. At first, Violet didn't know what to do, until she saw a bright light. She realized she'd felt this source before, the one she draws her energy from. The girl understood they were the same as that day in the garden. She felt a rush when the saint told her to open her eyes. Violet could barely believe she possessed such incredible power. She watched the woman, who seemed to be transferring her own strength. Their combined focus caused a beautiful tree to grow. The former saint smiled, remembering the girl saying she felt sorry for the flowers. She called that priest good-natured, but he looked at things from a human perspective. All people were born knowing they would die someday. So, the flowers bloomed only because they wanted to see her. Violet didn't get why they chose that over waiting for spring. The saint replied that for living things, only the present matters. The flowers preferred now to a ghostly future. They made their choice, accepting all the pain that would follow. She stroked the girl's cheek and told her not to be too sad. The saint smiled and said she'd get through it all, before she vanished. Violet woke up right as the sun came up after that. She was blown away that dreams could feel so real. Looking at her hand, she realized she'd even used her powers in it. Violet decided to try what she did in the dream, and bam, bright light. She was shocked she learned to shape it in just one dream. After getting ready, she decided to head out for a walk. Anne noticed she was distracted and asked what she was thinking about. The girl dodged the question, and Anne reminded her about their plans. The maid said she was born and raised right here on this estate. She loved the place, even with how freezing and harsh the weather is. These three young masters, they were born and raised right here before they moved to the capital. The maid smiled, pointing out a tree in the distance to her. She said that thing was the oldest tree on the estate, and her mom loved it like crazy. For some reason, it just stopped blooming and totally withered away. Violet found out by accident that Anne's mom had passed away too. It bummed her out when she realized the Marquis's sons also lost their mom when they were kids. She didn't get why she ever thought her suffering was worse than anyone else's. Violet felt a wave of guilt wash over her because of what she'd been thinking. Anne suddenly remembered there was a stable on the other side of the estate. The girl couldn't say no to that, so they decided to check it out. She was totally digging the vibe, even with the stink. The stable hand just happened to spot two girls hanging around, looking interested. Turns out that stable hand was Anne's grandpa, the old guy. He almost lost it when he figured the girl next to her was a saint. He tried to bow, showing respect for her making such a long trip. The guy added it was a real honor for him, and he was stoked. They kept chatting about everyday stuff, but Violet wasn't really listening. She was blown away that the estate had so many horses. She zoomed past the adults and ran right up to one of the stallions. The stable hand called a boy over and told him to greet the saint. The girl froze, staring at the guy they called Tommy. Something about his face felt weirdly familiar. The boy stepped forward, kind of shy, and greeted the saint. The second she saw his face, she knew who he was. Violet flashed back to her days living in the slums. She just wanted to play with everyone, but she was a total outcast. Everyone just saw her as that butcher's pathetic daughter. Even the other kids' parents thought she wasn't good enough to play with their kids. Violet wanted to disappear, but someone called out to her. Some bully laughed and asked if she wanted to join their game. The little girl glanced at the boy, Tommy, and nodded her head. The other kids cracked up when he suggested playing hide and seek. Violet was stoked and found a nice hiding spot, waiting to be found. Too bad they tricked her, which meant she sat there till nightfall. It all clicked when her parents found her after the sun went down. She burst into tears, realizing they never intended to play with her. After that, she just watched them play from the sidelines. She was surprised how much Tommy was sucking up to her. She figured he didn't recognize her, and looked over at the beautiful horse. He tried talking to her, but she didn't understand big animal talk. Violet reached for the horse, wondering if she'd ever really understand animals when she got older. Tommy freaked out, remembering how stubborn that horse could be. He started panicking, worried the animal might hurt the saint. But man, was he surprised to see how chill the horse was. The saint's gentle look made it clear she had everything under control. The second their eyes met, Tommy suddenly turned beet red. Violet, surprised by his reaction, decided to just ask him straight up. After a short pause, she asked him if he remembered her. The kid pretended he had no clue what she was talking about, acting all confused by her question. He'd recognized Violet the moment she took off her beret. He couldn't believe she actually became a saint. The girl just smiled and said it was totally true. Her hands clenched when he reminded her she was just a commoner. He grabbed his head, still not believing someone like her could be a saint. The kid tried to justify himself, saying the old saints were all nobles. Even though it stung, she knew he had a point. She decided to change the subject and asked him to feed the horses. While they were feeding them, the boy admitted she looked like a real lady from afar. The saint was happy, figuring she'd learned her lessons well. The boy casually asked how her parents were doing. Violet's face darkened, but she still told me about how they died. She couldn't help but remember the day they were killed right in front of her. Unfortunately, they were taken out in the most brutal way possible. Tommy awkwardly blurted out that his dad was gone, but his mom and grandma were still alive. The girl was secretly happy that at least someone from the village had made it. Tommy explained that his mom worked outside the village, and his grandma was bedridden. He added that his mom and grandma argued non-stop, every single day. Those two women were always known for their bickering anyway. Tommy was the only one who could actually bring home a decent paycheck. He smiled and said Violet was incredibly lucky to become a saint. The girl froze. Like all her hard work just got flushed down the toilet. She admitted to herself, things were still tough. Barely anything changed. Not even for a second could she relax, always terrified of screwing up. People kept talking trash and laughing behind her back too. She felt like she was suffocating, just thinking about overthrowing Malum. Still, she couldn't let herself whine about it to him. Violet decided to at least give the kid a little boost. She took the warm scarf from around her neck and wrapped it around him. He was stunned by the sudden kindness, but she just smiled. The kid stroked the soft scarf and gave her a shy little smile back. He suddenly looked away, then said her name. Tommy straight up admitted he felt bad for picking on her. They ended up chatting until the sun went down. Violet left the stables and headed back to the maid. Anne smirked to herself, seeing the kid in her scarf. She smiled and took off her warm wool cloak. The maid tucked her in, asking if she liked watching the horses. She even figured the smell of the greenery was stronger, because Violet was in a good mood. Anne suddenly remembered how bummed out the girl was about the plants. She just recalled the saint's words from the dream and shook those thoughts off. The kid said she's getting a better handle on her powers. Anne smiled sweetly and suggested they grab some cocoa back at the manor. Violet was totally stoked about the offer. She was all in. After that, it was just a bunch of days that felt exactly the same. Anne happily noticed that the saintess was actually eating more. She also overheard that the saintess has been hanging out at the stables a lot lately. The servants were gossiping about how cozy she's been getting with some stable boy. The estate manager even said the saintess, being a commoner, is perfect for all the help. They immediately started yakking about where the saintess came from. The servants kept running their mouths until they saw Anne's face. She was pissed. She came in like a whirlwind, scaring everyone into getting to work. The manager remembered he couldn't just ignore the Marquis's right-hand man's daughter. They called him a manager, but you wouldn't really know it by looking at him. Anne suddenly realized she was the only one in the whole estate actually doing their job right. She couldn't say anything to the others, since she was just a servant herself. Still, she was ready to look after the lady with the dedication of 10 people. Meanwhile, the saint was totally absorbed in reading a new book. Anne enjoyed watching how hard she was trying to learn. She decided to casually mention to the saint that she still couldn't find her scarf after 2 days. The saint started sweating bullets when Anne started thinking out loud about it. She said she tossed it when Anne asked if she was in the know. The maid almost cracked up at her childish innocence. She decided to just ask straight up about that stable boy. The saint went silent when she asked if he was her friend back then. Anne left, saying she couldn't get in the way of her happiness. Violet was thrown by how chill she was about it. Anne made the bed and said she should still pay attention to what people say. Violet immediately got what her maid was hinting at. She gripped her book, lost in thought, and said this was going too far. The girl didn't want to give up a friend just because people might judge her. Anne froze when the girl repeated her words, clearly upset. She put her book down, and then the maid went back to her room. That same night, Violet managed to connect with the saint again. The girl poured her heart out, telling her all about her day's troubles. The saint explained that the maid was just trying to look out for her. Violet knew Anne was just worried, but she still felt a sting in her heart. The saint stroked her hair and said she never meant to make her cry. Violet found it amazing that this wise woman seemed to see everything. She tried to figure out who she was, but the saint just gave her a riddle. The girl immediately started running through all the possible answers. Finally, she just straight up asked her if she was a goddess. The woman smirked and said her answer was pretty damn interesting. She replied that Violet was her goddess now. Her answer was so messed up, Violet got totally confused. The woman stroked her hands and told her she could think of her however she wanted. She gave her another sweet smile and promised she'd find out everything. Violet mentioned she'd already seen someone who looked like a god. She added that he had golden eyes and silver hair. The goddess smiled, remarking that she'd already met that kid. Violet figured she knew him, but she just silently turned her head. The goddess said the maid girl was definitely sticking with her. Her words got Violet thinking she should apologize. The saint just smiled and said to do it if she wanted to. The day came, but the girl still couldn't bring herself to say sorry. She figured Anne was probably still pissed at her after what happened. Tommy spotted her and said she hadn't been around much lately. The kid dropped a bale of hay and said his grandma was sick again. The girl sadly suggested he get a healer. No sooner did she say that than he gave her this nasty look. He reminded her that his family didn't have the cash for that. Truth is, Violet stopped visiting Tommy because he kept whining and getting cockier. She knew what he was angling for, but she couldn't help him out. So, the girl decided to give him the only thing she had. She figured he could call a healer if he sold the eye stones. Too bad for her. That gesture just pissed the kid off even more. He threw the teddy bear on the floor and asked what good it was supposed to do him. Tommy was fuming with rage, like he wanted to tear her to shreds. Violet froze, shocked to see her favorite teddy bear on the ground. She meant well, but it totally backfired on her. Tommy started ranting that she didn't get it and didn't need anything. He said she couldn't understand where he was coming from, because she didn't have anyone. Violet couldn't take it anymore and just snapped at him. He flinched when she asked him what the hell he even knew about her. She wanted a family, but everyone close to her was dead. She added that he had no clue where or how she grew up. She had nothing either, and she was getting beat to hell. Violet was crying, sadly pointing out that things were tough for her too. Looks like Tommy had no idea she was going to open up like that. The little girl walked up and proudly held up her dirty toy. She said it was super important to her, because it was her first birthday present. Violet slammed the period down, saying she wasn't coming back. She bolted in the opposite direction, not even waiting for a reply. Meanwhile, Anne was surprised the lady wasn't in the stables. She figured she'd been in a bad mood all day yesterday. She was racking her brain, trying to figure out how to cheer her up. Anne froze when she heard weird noises coming from the room. She walked in on Violet scrubbing her toy like crazy. The maid immediately scanned the room, taking everything in. She was pissed that the other maids didn't even help her fetch water. Anne bit down hard on her lip, barely keeping it together. She asked for the bear, but the saint refused to give it to her. The girl said she was good at laundry, but it didn't make Anne feel any better. It bothered her that the little girl seemed more confident doing laundry than reading a book. She imagined how tough things must be for her to be used to that kind of life. Violet felt a gentle embrace and was about to burst into tears. The girl cried, saying she had absolutely nobody. Even so, people still kept talking trash about her. She didn't even know if it was actually her fault anymore. The girl broke down when Anne told her it couldn't possibly be her fault. After a while, Violet finally felt some relief. She nodded, letting me know she was feeling a little better now. Anne promised she'd clean up the teddy bear and make it good as new. She smiled as the saint humbly thanked her. Violet hated herself for getting mad at the one who always comforted her. She couldn't apologize with words, but an idea popped into her head. The saint turned to Anne and asked her to go somewhere with her. They headed straight towards the tree, bathed in the moonlight. Anne tried to figure out why she'd decided to come here of all places. The saint recalled that Anne's mother had wanted to see the tree bloom. The maid agreed, but it was impossible because of how old it was. She was beyond shocked when the saint said she'd actually help. She just walked forward silently, getting ready to work some magic. The girl touched the tree trunk and focused all her attention. Slowly, her hands started to glow, showing off a blue light. Anne was blown away by the young god's messenger's abilities. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the tree's branches grow. Finally, the tree grew to an unbelievable size, like it was an illusion. Anne thought she'd never see this again, but her dream came true. She'd buried that scent with her memories, but now it was real again. Violet stood on her tiptoes to pick just one flower. She held out a flower, letting me know it was an apology for yesterday. Just the thought of it warmed my heart right up. I was totally charmed by this incredible, kind Lady Violet. Every day, I felt more and more like she was a mom to me. Impossible not to love. The maid genuinely thanked the lady for the sweet gesture and smiled. The next morning rolled around, and Anne had to leave the estate. Right up until the last minute, she doubted things would go smoothly. The saintess calmed Anne down, reminding her it was only for a week. Turns out, her father was sick and she had to cover for him. Violet pushed her to take the trip and asked her to deliver a letter. Anne agreed to the request and asked if she had a letter for the Marquise. The girl had prepared a letter, but she was worried about possible mistakes. The maid convinced her that the man would be happy to hear any news at all. She patted the girl and mentioned he'd even sent her a beautiful fur coat. That gave her confidence, and she agreed to hand over the envelope. Anne carefully concealed the envelope and headed for her carriage. She climbed into it, promising that she would be back soon. Violet smiled and told her to spend extra time with her father. She waved happily, watching as the carriage drove away. The saint wanted to go back to the estate in peace, but something stopped her. She saw Tommy walking right towards her, looking totally lost. He'd been hitching the horses, mulling over what to say the whole time. She knew he wanted to talk, but she couldn't forgive what he'd done. She just walked away, still not wanting him anywhere near her. Morning came, and Violet woke up completely surprised. She groggily got up, wondering why Anne hadn't woken her. The dead silence reminded her she was back in the capital. Just like she figured, the maids were slacking off with the saint now that she was gone. Even the attention from her assigned maid was way different than what Anne used to do. Looks like all the maids wanted to do was gossip and talk trash about the saint. They were always forgetting to take care of her, but she handled everything herself. Besides that, she spent most of her time holed up in the library. Every single day she'd show up, ready to dig into new books. Then, one day, she got her hands on a book about the history of Agritia. It kept bringing up info about how important the saint was. The saint sacrificed herself for the whole country, so she was basically royalty. According to the laws, she was protected by both the Pope and the King. The girl started to doubt that, and remembered a lesson she had with the Countess. The Countess told her about Pope Lindo, a guy whose identity was a total secret. The saint couldn't help but wonder if they'd ever cross paths. She realized Anne would be back in just 2 days. She froze when she heard a knock on the door behind her. The saintess gave herself away in the library by dropping a book. She turned around slowly, trying to figure out who it was. It struck her as weird since the maids never looked for her here. Cautiously, she went to the door and asked who was there. To her surprise, the stranger didn't bother answering. She felt a threat, but her curiosity was stronger. The girl gathered her courage and decided to open the door. She was even more surprised when she saw someone she knew. Tommy stood before her, practically frozen solid from the blizzard. She went to say something, but he just launched himself at her. He practically begged her to save his sick grandma. The kid was asking her to save her with her holy power. Violet was caught completely off guard and yanked her hand away. She slammed the door shut so nobody could hear and asked how he got in. She demanded he get back before anyone found him. He froze when she added that she didn't have any such power. The girl said that even if she did, she still couldn't leave without permission. The boy walked up and said that she could heal because of her holy power. He kept denying what she said, but she really couldn't do any of that stuff. She lowered her head, feeling guilty, and asked him again to leave. You should have seen her face when this cocky dude just dropped to his knees. He begged her to at least visit his grandma, just to cheer her up a little. She couldn't let herself do it, but his tears were tearing her up inside. The girl just kept watching him, begging her with tears streaming down his face. Tommy was saying she just needed to show his grandma her face, that's all. He was guilt-tripping her, saying she hadn't helped him out at all so far. Violet stood her ground, saying the guards would catch them for sure. Tommy said he knew a secret passage, so she could get out and back no problem. She bit her lip, feeling two sides of herself fighting it out. He was her only friend from her hometown, and he was practically begging for help. She figured nothing bad could happen, so she agreed. The girl said thoughtfully that she needed to get back soon. Tommy jumped up, showering her with grateful thanks. After that, the girl pulled up her warm hood and got ready. They peeked nervously from behind the door, scoping out the situation. Tommy cheered up, seeing the manor hallway was totally empty. They bolted for the exit before anyone spotted them. Violet followed the boy, trusting that she'd definitely be back. Meanwhile, the Marquis sat lost in thought in his study. He was still mulling over the letter his adopted daughter had written. He tapped it awkwardly, like he couldn't bring himself to open it. Anne stood nearby, tense, waiting for him to finally make up his mind. She could see he was itching to read it, but he was holding back. He decided to ask how her father was doing after being sick. The Marquis suggested she go back to the estate with Daniel. The next second, Adrian burst into the room, full of energy. He yelled that he was going to the estate too. He was pissed that his brothers were going, and he had to stay behind. Turns out, Esselmund was planning on going to the estate too, besides Daniel. The Marquis ignored his tantrum and just laid out Anne's demands. She agreed, and then tried to calm the kid down. Bjorn was tired of his son's whining, and finally let him go. He knew the spring festival in the west was coming up soon. On the first night of the week-long festival, a member of the feudal lord's family has to launch the first lantern. Only then could everyone else launch their own. Thinking about all this, the Marquis finally decided to open the letter. He carefully opened the envelope and then started reading. A smile spread across his face as he read his daughter's awkward little lines. He had no clue the kind of danger she was walking into. The girl had no idea there was even a secret passage in the mansion. Luckily, Tommy knew when the guards changed, so they were able to sneak through. Doubt crept in when she thought about how far his house was from the estate. Violet froze when he announced, "We're here!" Before her stood a small, rundown shack, screaming poverty. The moment the door swung open, Tommy called out for his grandma. Violet took a step forward and heard the floorboards creak loudly. Her blood ran cold when she saw the woman chained to the bed. Tommy's grandma was breathing heavily, like she was slowly dying with each breath. This gloomy scene just made everything feel even darker. Violet was totally blindsided. I mean, she was fine just a minute ago. The girl walked to the bed, wondering if she could even help. She knew damn well she didn't have the juice to save someone yet. The saint touched the old woman's hand, figuring she had to do something. She unleashed the power, screw the guilt trip later. Instantly, the woman who'd been asleep snapped her eyes open. It was like she was trying to signal the kid standing behind her. He was shaking with shame, begging Violet to forgive him. The girl looked around, totally surprised, not realizing she'd walked into a trap. The next second, a whole mob of guys burst into the room. They surrounded the little girl, scaring her with their nasty laughter. She sadly looked at the one person she genuinely wanted to help. He clutched his head and trembled, still begging her for forgiveness. Violet screamed for the first time, like she couldn't believe what he'd dragged her into. The scary thugs continued to loom over her. They started mocking her, not believing she was actually a saint. With every new word, Tommy started apologizing even harder. I guess even he was disgusted by what he'd done. Even so, his mom was praising him for succeeding. The second she walked in, some thug grabbed Violet's arm, rough. He laughed, saying the boss was gonna love her hair, no doubt. Her wrist was killing her, and she cried out for Tommy. He started shaking, saying he had no choice, not with the medical bills. The thug clapped him on the shoulder, telling him, "You can't fool a saint." He cackled, saying it was all to pay for his mom's drinking habit. He added that even though Tommy made good money, he never called a doctor. Turns out, he was blowing it all on his mother's booze. He dropped to the floor, begging them to stop saying all that stuff. Looks like Violet realized even the kid had been played. She couldn't help but think he'd betrayed her for a few drinks. His mom reached out to the thug, real slow and dramatic. He slipped her a couple coins and said he'd put in a good word with the boss. The guy ordered them to blindfold the saint and gag her. She tried to break free, saying she needed to get back ASAP. The girl froze when a mercenary's sharp axe appeared right in front of her face. He suggested they not tire each other out and just chill quietly. The merc smirked, saying torturing kids wasn't exactly their hobby. He didn't even finish the sentence before the saint suddenly grabbed the axe. The guy yelled and yanked her hand away from the sharp blade. They couldn't let her get damaged, or they'd get paid less. The girl glanced at her former friend as they decided to shove a bag over her head. Hope was draining from her body, and tears were blurring her vision. She couldn't help but wonder if it would hurt less if Tommy did this to save his grandma. The mercs slung her over their shoulder, blindfolded her, and carried her out of the house. The girl squeezed the cut hard, trying to leave some kind of evidence. She remembered the Duke saying her blood was a gift from God. Violet didn't know if it would work, but she was still holding on to hope. Meanwhile, the Marquis's sons had just arrived at the estate. Esselmund immediately narrowed his eyes, like he'd spotted something wrong. "Anne," Daniel asked, "was it like this before you left?" The girl eyed the scene warily, trying to spot what was different. Finally, they realized the whole estate was in a total uproar. All the servants were freaking out, because the saint had just vanished. The Baron bowed his head when his eldest asked what was going on. He didn't have a trace of his usual arrogance about him. The guy shuffled his feet, not knowing how to break the news. Daniel sensed the heavy tension and asked what the hell was up. Seems like Esselmund figured it out and asked where the saint was. The Baron started shaking even harder and begged for forgiveness again. He was ready to die. But then his oldest son's expression changed everything. The guy squeezed his eyes shut, terrified, and blurted out that she was gone. Anne was so stunned, her purse even slipped right out of her hand. The younger brother was baffled, because the estate had top-notch security. The Baron agreed, but they still couldn't find the lady anywhere. Esselmund felt a wave of disappointment. Realizing he hadn't seen any of this coming, he realized he hadn't even considered the possibility of her just vanishing. He hadn't even noticed her crying in the garden on her birthday. Ed knew she was doing whatever the hell she wanted right now. He felt a surge of anger thinking she'd run away on purpose. The kid pulled himself together and ordered all the servants and knights to assemble. He announced, dead serious, that he was personally leading the search. Within minutes, an army had formed right in front of him. Ed was barking out orders, but Anne's mind was stuck on one thing. She knew there's no way the girl ran off or left with some stranger. As soon as one hunch hit her, she immediately turned to Ed. Knowing the girl well, she insisted they needed to check the stables. After those words, they headed straight there, quick as hell. The stable hand told them the Saintess and Tommy had a spat, and she hadn't been back since. He surprised them by saying that today was the first time Tommy hadn't shown up either. The guy remembered that Tommy lived down by the docks. As soon as they hit the slums, Ed told everyone to hold up. He noticed these glowing flowers, growing out of the saint's tears. Esselmund tightened his grip on the reins, knowing something made her cry. He changed course and followed the flowers straight to where they led. Meanwhile, the girl had been locked up in some room for days now. From snippets of other people's conversations, she figured out they were gonna sell her. Surprisingly, they hadn't laid a hand on her, put her in a warm room, and fed her regularly. Even so, she barely had an appetite because she was so stressed. The girl turned away when she felt the boss man staring at her. He said that as a representative of a god, she deserved all the praise in the world. The guy added she'd be a seriously high-dollar item, even as a slave. They tried to stop him, but he just didn't believe in any god. He went off on the Pope, real harsh, and called Violet a freak. A smile lit up his face when he got the word the traitors were here. Violet felt a jolt of pure fear when she heard their client was on site. Just a couple minutes later, they tied her up and dragged her outside like cattle. She kept squeezing blood out of the cut on her arm. From their conversation, she started freaking out that they were going to sell her to the Pope. The boss just kept laying into his guys, breaking them down. She was shaking, trying to figure out who she'd end up being sold to. The guy said their client wasn't any dad or some fancy-pants marquise. He glanced at the shady crowd and said their client was from Gunnar. Violet froze when she heard that familiar name. She remembered the very day the Countess told her about them. These folks rejected the whole absolute god thing in Agridia. The barbaric Gunners worshipped a god they called the Great Spirit. They were rough around the edges and wanted to take over Agridia, but Saint Anastasia wiped them out. After that, they created this huge country called Gujarat, and they gave their leaders all kinds of different names. The next thing she knew, the guy they called Kagan was standing right in front of her. She started struggling harder, which just brought a smile to the leader's face. He said they probably wouldn't kill her, not after paying such a high price. Seemed like his smug comment just scared the girl even more. She froze, staring in terror at these strangers who'd just arrived. Kagan slowly walked towards the girl, like he was studying her. The man got right up close to the kid and looked at her mark. She kept staring at him, not knowing what they were going to do to her next. Kagan ordered them to take off her gag, and the translator relayed the message. The leader just started untying the gag without another word. Finally, the gag was off her mouth, and she could breathe normally. She had no idea why this guy was grinning like that. He just kept staring at her with his sly green eyes. He scanned her up and down, noticing there wasn't a drop of blood. Kagan grabbed her hand fast and spotted a cut on it. He immediately turned to the boss and started laying into him. The girl's face fell when she realized they'd figured out her plan. The boss chuckled, guessing she was trying to leave a trail. His eyes went wide with surprise when he looked behind her. He saw flowers magically sprouting from her drops of blood. The boss man grabbed her shoulder, eyes burning right through her. Violet was freaked, not knowing what the hell was gonna happen next. 1 second later, she was eating dirt after a slap to the face. He was seeing red, pissed that their location was blown wide open. Violet squeezed her eyes shut, feeling her lips and cheeks swell up. Kagan immediately lit into the boss for laying hands on the saint. He was all caught up in the yelling match. Then he saw something weird. He saw the saint pressing her palms flat against the ground. In the blink of an eye, plants started exploding everywhere. The Hunnic warriors were blown away by the saint's crazy miracle. The boss roared with rage and swung, trying to kill the girl. Before he could touch her, backup came charging in. Violet looked up, surprised, and saw familiar faces. She saw her older brother practically cleave the mercenary's arm off. It happened so fast, the jerk didn't even have time to blink. The next thing you know, his arm and sword went crashing into the water. Ed lowered his bloody sword and said it was Marquis Ermengarde's order. Violet flinched, realizing she was finally safe. Ed ordered them to leave no one alive except the gunner people. The tribesmen immediately rushed to shield their leader. The sound of clashing steel rang out, and just like that, the mercenaries were down. Violet was turning over her brother's words about Marquis Ermengarde's orders in her head. She was racking her brain, trying to remember where she'd heard something like that before. Ed felt her eyes on him and shot her a hard look. Violet looked down surprised when she was suddenly scooped up into someone's arms. Esselmund announced himself, all stern, giving his name and title. He pointed his sword and told them their country wasn't a place where they could do whatever they wanted. He stared straight at Kagan, who was surrounded by his tribesmen. The young man kept his sword aimed and ordered them to go back where they came from. His opponent just gave St. Violet a long, hard look. She felt his gaze and looked back, totally surprised. He smirked and said something that made absolutely no sense. Esselmund frowned when he heard that last word. The girl shivered, feeling like she didn't understand a damn thing. She was surprised Kagan just decided to walk away like that. A soldier ran up to them, stoked to have found the saint. Esselmund silently turned to the girl and yanked the rope off her wrists. He told them to tell Sir Besselhound to get the hell out of here. After that, he hoisted his sister onto a horse and rode off ahead. Violet looked around and saw a whole freaking pile of bloody corpses. She shuddered, scared stiff, but a voice she didn't know told her not to worry. The girl looked at the horse, like it was the one telling her not to be afraid. It was the first time Violet had ever heard an animal's voice like that. Meanwhile, Esselmund was still racking his brain, totally stressed. He just couldn't shake that phrase the boss had dropped. It meant he was definitely coming to take what was his, no question. He kept muttering to himself until they finally pulled up to the estate. Daniel, looking seriously worried, rushed out to meet them. He yelled when he saw the little girl, all beat up like that. He'd been so worried the whole time, he couldn't help but hug her tight. Violet was totally blindsided by this sudden outpouring of emotion. She spotted the others and figured they all came together. It finally hit her. Everything that had just happened to her. The girl just let it all out, collapsing into exhausted sobs. Only Esselmund just kept watching her, lost in thought. He snapped at Anne, telling her to stop babying the saint. He stated firmly that she needed to understand the consequences of her choices. Anne didn't get why he was being so harsh with Violet. Even the girl herself seemed surprised by everyone's reaction. Anne asked if he really needed to push it this far. Ed reminded her that backtalking wasn't allowed, and she needed to own up to what happened. Finally, he decided to end it once and for all, and told her to follow him. His face was set, showing he wasn't messing around. Nobody knew what he was planning, but they all did what he said anyway. They walked into a huge hall where everyone was lined up. As the victim, Violet had to stand next to Ed. She wrung her hands nervously, clueless about why they were there. The girl froze, all tense, when she heard the doors swing open. She was totally shocked when Tommy walked into the hall. Seeing Tommy's family, his oldest son said he was sitting in that position on his father's behalf. All three of them started begging him for mercy, tears streaming down their faces. Ed laid out every single screw-up they'd managed to pull off. The woman tried to argue that it wasn't like that at all. She claimed they were just following orders, doing what they were told under threat. Ed reminded her that it was the saints' job to protect their lands. He added that their actions were basically trying to tear the country apart. The woman went silent, fear dawning as she understood the price of her mistake. She said she knew nothing about the Gujarati or any other people. Tommy's mom kept making excuses to the bitter end, but it just made him laugh. He told her she had absolutely no right to hand over the saint. Esselmund came down slow, radiating pure dread. He towered over the scum who threatened the whole damn kingdom. Ed asked how their sick grandma was looking so damn perky. Tommy was shaking, saying the saint's power stopped the sickness. Esselmund stared at the girl, like he was waiting for her to chime in. He announced it was the first time the saint had ever blessed anyone. Then he whipped out his sword and lopped the liar's head clean off. Anne cringed back, not wanting to see all the blood fly. Tommy watched his grandma bite it like it was a movie or something. Esselman roared, all menacing, that he'd execute them all, right then and there. Tommy's mom threw her hands up, begging him to save them. Tommy figured he could sway Violet, so he asked her for help. After that betrayal, she didn't want to hear his pleas. Still, she didn't want him dead, and she heard his cries. Giving in to her pity, she hurried to Esselmund, tears streaming down her face. She begged her brother not to do it. Violet even offered to take all the blame, just to spare them. Ed replied, "You gotta understand the consequences of your choices." She said she got it and begged him to let them live. The blade in his hand froze when she added, "Tommy's my only friend from the village." He told her, cold as ice, to get a grip and realize her place. The girl snapped to attention and screamed when he swung again. She grabbed his cloak and watched the woman's head roll. All the pain she'd been through came crashing down on her. She remembered the soldiers mocking her dead sister. Something inside her just broke when they used her head as a ball. That incident made her realize the price of every single choice she made. If she was sold off to another country, it could mean the end of her nation. It wasn't her fault, and those guys were gonna get what was coming to them. Even so, all this death was tearing her fragile soul apart. She froze like a statue when Anne came into her room. The girl said, scared, that Violet had been asleep for 3 days straight. The saint just kept staring blankly at the maid. Anne's heart ached at her lost, beaten-down look. She rushed to hug the girl, wanting to offer some support. Anne knew how tough it was for her, but still asked how she was doing. Violet still couldn't find the strength to answer. After a short silence, she said, resigned, that she didn't want to live. Little did she know, one of the sons was watching their conversation. Right now, nothing mattered to her except easing the pain. She just stared blankly at the ceiling, kept saying she wanted to die. After she said that, Esselman quietly slipped out of the room. He took his sweet time leaving, just leaving the girls alone together. Even after the saint was snatched, they were still moving forward with the operation. It was a covert thing, all about taking down a smuggling ring. They were doing it to keep the Pope from getting any leverage. The staff was freaked out, but it ended with some key guys getting the axe. Days dragged on, but Violet still felt this hole in her chest. She turned around when Daniel asked her what she was up to. The girl paused, then said she was just reading a book. He tried to comfort her, gently stroking her hair. She knew damn well that this whole thing was cruel and messed up. Daniel made a mental note that she hadn't smiled once since that day. He wanted to see her smile, so he told her their aunt was coming to visit soon. He anticipated Violet's surprise and explained it was his dad's sister. She married an earl and lives further north from here. He added that she has a daughter, Annabelle, who's the same age as Violet. Daniel hoped they would become friends, putting on a friendly face. Violet didn't respond at all, because she couldn't care less. Later that day, her younger brother, Adrian, came to see her. He was trying to get the saintess's attention, complaining about how bored he was. He kept distracting her from her reading, which gradually started to piss her off. Violet, annoyed, told him to go outside and just take a walk. The kid stuck his tongue out, all indignant, and said that was lame. He also demanded she call him by his name, like she does with everyone else. Violet agreed to his request, which totally blew the guy away. He couldn't believe she actually called him what he wanted to be called. Adrian was over the moon after that kind of reward. He grinned happily and called her sis right back. The girl thoughtfully turned the page and said she was in shock too. The kid looked embarrassed, asking if she was scared. He was struggling to get his thoughts straight, you know? He seemed awkward, but he genuinely wanted to be there for her. Adrian swallowed hard, waiting to see how the saintess would react. He gathered his courage and reached out his hand to her. Violet thought he'd smack her, but he just gave her a clumsy pat. It's like even he didn't really know what he was trying to do. He frantically smoothed down all the loose hairs sticking up on his head. Adrian promised to tell him not to do that again next time. The saintess just gave a cold reply, saying she didn't buy it. She saw how surprised he was and told him he never listened to her. She looked down and added that it wasn't his fault. It was now clear to her that she wasn't like them. The saint felt strongly that she couldn't be friends with Tommy anymore. From now on, she had to be above them, looking down. She'd understood it before, but could only truly grasp it now. Adrian watched the girl closely and thought she was crying again. He tried to say that she could cry in front of him. The girl yelled at her brother, showing she didn't agree with that. She looked at the boy and realized he just wanted to comfort her. He's pulled this kind of crap before, just in a weirder way. She was freaked out at first, but now talking to him makes her smile. After a few days, the Marquis's sister finally showed up. This high-class lady was walking with her daughter. Daniel was the first to greet the guests at the estate. Violet stared thoughtfully at the girl who was her age. She quickly figured out that it was Annabella. Before she could even say hello, Annabella ran to hug Daniel. Annabella started going on about how much she missed him, but the guy told her to bow to the saint. Her mom latched onto that immediately and said she didn't know anything about it. The kid just mumbled not to worry about it. The woman straight up ignored her and glommed onto Daniel. Annabella immediately started whining about Eddie not being at the estate. All that saccharine crap made Adrian want to puke. The Countess scolded him, telling him he needed to be friendly. Adrian made a big show of going over to Violet and calling her his sister. The girl was totally caught off guard by that sudden display of affection. He instantly grabbed Violet's hand and told her they should get out of there. Looks like Annabella just started hating St. Violet even more. As soon as they were in the room, Adrian blurted out how much he hated that girl. He flopped onto Violet's bed, ranting about how much he hated Annabelle. Adrian straight up hid in the saint's room to get away from everything. He went on and on again about how much he can't stand Annabelle. Violet could tell he wasn't faking it, not even a little bit. The saint figured the girl must be hot, and Daniel's into her. Adrian, like he read her mind, said some commoner like Violet's way better. He doubled down, saying she's way cuter and nicer too. Anne flared up at his rude-ass, totally disrespectful words. She kicked his butt right out of the saint's room, pronto. The next morning, Annabelle invited the girl for tea. She was acting all sweet and innocent, super happy to have a new friend. The saint just smiled back and said it was an honor for her. Annabella was getting annoyed by how perfect the saint's manners were. Violet's eyes just happened to land on a doll sitting nearby. It looked a lot like the one the Marquis gave her a while back. Looks like Annabella noticed the glare that little brat was giving her. She smirked, hoping that her brother Ed would be back soon. The girl said he was really nice and always gave her tours. The saint was surprised, knowing how cold her older brother could be. She immediately thought he wouldn't act like that if Annabella was his sister. Violet was so lost in her own head, she wasn't even listening. Taking her chance, the guest reached out and offered her the doll. She figured Violet wanted this one in particular. She smiled and asked her to take it as a sign of their newfound friendship. Violet didn't want to be rude, so she took the doll anyway. Just then, Daniel approached them with a servant in tow. The saint turned around when Annabelle rushed towards him again. She gave him a tight hug, clinging to him and calling him her brother. She started crying and begged him to buy her another doll. Annabelle sadly pointed out that her doll already belonged to the saint. Daniel could barely believe the saint took the doll. The servants started bad-mouthing Violet's actions, which got her mom's attention. The woman jumped to conclusions, seeing the girl's doll and the tears in her eyes. She demanded to know why the saint was holding Annabelle's doll. The saint explained, confused, that the lady gave her this doll. The woman called that BS, saying it was a birthday gift from her dad. Daniel sided with Annabelle and asked for the doll back. The little girl insisted she was okay and that she thought the saint wanted it. Her mother grilled her, asking why she just gave away her favorite doll like that. The saint held the doll back out to her, but the woman refused to take it. That lady judged Violet and decided to buy her own daughter a better doll. Everyone kept circling around crying Annabelle, clueless about what happened. Only Violet was left completely alone, holding the unwanted doll. She went back to the room where Adrian was hiding again. Anne happily shoved Adrian aside and was thrilled by the saint. Looks like even the boy was interested in the girl's arrival. He saw her beaten down look and asked what kind of doll she was holding. Violet slumped and told Anne she had been wrong about everything. She decided to tell them everything that happened, which made them indignant. Even Violet didn't know why Annabelle decided to do all this. Adrian called that girl a little demon, ruining everyone's lives. Anne added that the Countess was ready to pick a fight with her. She called it a true display of the power struggle between aristocrats. Violet was shocked by the sheer absurdity of the whole situation. Now everyone thought she was arrogant, not knowing she had a doll way better. She felt confused, not understanding why this situation even started. Her reputation as a saint was already in the gutter because of her background. She didn't get why Annabelle needed her to look even worse. Everyone already loved her, but she decided to rise above by making the saint look bad. Adrian noticed her confusion and told her to trust him. He was pissed because she didn't take him seriously. Time passed, and Violet's lonely days were getting kinda nice. She wanted to clear things up with Daniel, but it was a lost cause. Adrian would pop into her room every now and then, grinning like a loon. She couldn't figure out what he was up to, but she definitely suspected something. One day, he pulled out a worm and started trying to scare Annabelle. He chased her all over the place, like he was out for revenge or something. The kids spotted the nun and gave her a big, happy smile. He thought it was fair, since Violet got blamed for stealing the doll. The boy kept chasing her until she collapsed on the floor. Annabella insisted she was just stating the facts. She tried to call out the saint for telling her brother a different story. Annabella also suspected she was the one who ordered him to harass her. Adrian immediately spoke up, saying he acted completely on his own. Annabella retorted that she'd been watching their little scheme closely. She even brought up the bugs he'd dumped in her shoes. She pointed a finger at Violet, claiming it was all her orders. The saint replied that they'd never even discussed anything like that with Adrian. She spends almost all her time in her room, so it's all a lie. The saint straight up asked why she hated her so much for no good reason. She also asked why she cried when she gave her the doll. She added that she already had a doll, a gift from the Marquise. Annabella decided to play it different and just cried harder. Violet was floored by the guest's manipulative behavior. She got what she wanted, and Daniel rushed over to her sobs. Annabella started saying that Adrian and the saint were in cahoots. The maids immediately backed her up, saying they were constantly bullying the girl. One of them suggested that the saint must have learned that kind of thing on the streets. Her words set Daniel off, and he ordered her to watch her mouth. He looked so terrifying that the maids immediately started whimpering. Anne jumped to the saint's defense, saying she had nothing to do with it. Another maid piped up, saying Adrian was always sneaking into the saint's room. Anne demanded they justify why they thought the saint was controlling Adrian. Daniel shot back, saying he couldn't trust a maid's word completely. Turning to Violet, he snapped, "How long are you going to keep stirring up trouble?" Daniel repeated the same words, but this time directed at Annabelle. He demanded Violet show the saint some mercy. The guy got all intense, demanding she apologize first. Violet was burning up with injustice and refused to apologize. Even so, she didn't want to screw up her relationship with Daniel. She swallowed her pride and apologized to Annabelle. The girl coldly said that there had been a misunderstanding between them. After those words, a satisfied smile lit up Annabelle's face. She hugged the saint and said that everything was fine. But right near her ear, she whispered that a commoner like her shouldn't dare to compete. After that, she subtly pushed the girl away and asked her to grant a request. She pointed a finger at Anne and asked to borrow her while they were here. She said that back in the capital, Anne always took care of her. Anne cut in, saying she was escorting Lady Violet on Ed's direct orders. Annabelle smiled and said she'd talk to him herself. She mentioned how he always listens to her requests. Daniel begged Violet, saying it was just for a week. Anne tried to argue, but he immediately drew a hard line. He stated sternly that he was the one in charge of the estate now. Violet couldn't refuse, because it could hurt Anne. Anne gasped in surprise when the saint gave her consent. Annabella smirked smugly and thanked the girl. She glanced victoriously at the saint and acknowledged the favor shown to her. That same night, Daniel came to Violet's room. He stroked her head, noticing how upset she was. The kid said he was super sorry, but his hands were tied. Hartford County was in charge of the North Wall, Sector 4, and he couldn't afford to screw up that relationship. Auntie was a real piece of work, and Annabelle was just a kid. Violet could see how much all this crap was stressing Daniel out. He promised he'd get her other maids to make up for it. He saw her tears and called her his adorable little sister. He kissed her forehead and told her she was always on his mind. That night, she felt a spark of hope, which was soon crushed to dust. Daniel, who used to be so nice, forbade Violet from going to the festival. But before that, a whole bunch of other stuff went down. Esselmund was making his way down the busy streets, heading out on business. He was suddenly hit by the weight of everything that had happened recently. The kid remembered Tommy begging for his life. He knew the kid had to be executed, but he just couldn't do it. Violet's pleading had him second-guessing himself, and he couldn't bring himself to do it. He could still hear her scream as she called Tommy her friend. After a lot of thinking, he ordered Tommy locked up in the dungeon. He stashed his sword, glancing back at his sleeping sister every now and then. She'd passed out and been lying on the floor in the traitor's blood. He looked closely at her sad, beaten-up face. Ed justified his actions by saying his dad would have done the same thing. That's what he thought anyway, until he overheard the saint's little speech. His mind changed the moment she said she wanted to die. None of his family had ever said anything even remotely like that. Even hard-working Daniel always kept a smile on his face. The way she said it, he knew she really meant it. He realized his methods had driven her right into the depths of despair. Ed took off, blaming himself for pushing her this far. Even now, he knew deep down he'd screwed up. He stumbled across some regular folks, chatting about getting ready for the festival. Esselmund looked up at the sky and remembered. Today was the day. Meanwhile, the saintess was completely surrounded by maids. They even swapped out the regular menu for her favorite desserts. She missed Anne, but she didn't want to start any trouble. Violet wanted to launch a sky lantern and decided to ask Daniel about it. She took off like a shot to find her older brother. She used to launch lanterns even back when she lived in the Flower District. On festival day, nobody paid them any mind. Nobody called them names. It was a day where they could feel connected, even if just for a little while. She found Annabella already bombarding Daniel with questions. She cut herself off, shooting the saint a look of pure disdain. She was practically burning holes in the girl with her eyes, all while holding on to the guy's arm. He immediately turned to Violet, asking her what was up. The girl explained, kind of spaced out, that she came for a sky lantern. Annabella burst out laughing, asking if she was planning on going to the festival too. The saint was stunned, not understanding why she was even saying all this. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole when they told her she couldn't go to the festival. Daniel explained that it was because she didn't have Esselmund's permission. He shrugged, saying there was nothing he could do until his brother showed up, which meant she wasn't going to be able to launch a lantern this year. Anne wanted to stay with Violet, but Annabella called out to her. The saintess hurried off, feeling like a third wheel. She ran ahead, feeling like this was all too much. It hurt, because even on Flower Street, she never missed him. She accidentally bumped into Adrian, who was carrying a lantern. He blocked her path and asked if she got the lantern from his brother. The kid was happily rambling about his lantern until he learned about the rule. He immediately noticed her empty hands. Adrian thought it was all BS and told her to grab the lantern. Even so, she knew she might get called an instigator again. Adrian said he wasn't going either, but the saint said she'd get blamed again. The kid knew he was powerless, so he tried to cheer her up. Finally, the girl made it to the library door. She stopped and asked me to tell Daniel to have a blast for her. The saint added that she wouldn't see them off, and slammed the door shut. After a while, she realized their carriage was gone. The girl blankly walked forward and plopped down on the floor. She hugged herself tight, and then she finally started to cry. She was so hurt and pissed off that she couldn't hold it in anymore. Last year, she was happy with her sisters, and now she's all alone. She was so alone and heartbroken, she didn't even hear Ed show up. He spotted a girl crying and asked what she was doing out there. Violet definitely wasn't expecting him back today, of all days. She stared blankly at the guy she currently hated with a passion. Turns out, he got back just as everyone else was leaving. He asked if everyone was gone, and she confirmed it. He was totally shocked to hear the saint was in the library. He bolted towards her, confused why she'd be left on her own. The guy was wondering what she was up to when he heard sobbing. He looked ahead and saw her bawling her eyes out on the floor. Ed felt another pang of guilt in his heart when he saw the girl. He asked her why she was always crying alone like that. The guy walked up, holding his sword, and asked, "Where's Anne?" The girl sniffled and said she left with the Countess. He calmly asked her where everyone else was right now. She told him straight up and was surprised when he asked why she was there. Violet snapped at him, saying that he was the one who told her not to leave. The look on his face made her realize he didn't even know. She burst into tears again, saying she wouldn't meet anyone there anyway. She added that it was all because of what he did. The saint burst into tears, saying she had nowhere to even run to. She kept asking why he was forbidding her from doing anything. The girl didn't realize he just didn't want that kind of thing to happen. Ed couldn't figure out why Daniel had abandoned her and followed orders. He suddenly realized how much influence the Countess's family held. Ed understood that the guests' reaction to Violet was the deciding factor. If everything had been fine, they would have taken her with them. He darkened, realizing he'd screwed up again. After a pause, Ed ordered the girl to get up off the floor. He calmly walked over to her and held out his large hand. Violet blamed everything on loneliness, but then his voice sounded kinda gentle. She had her doubts, but she still decided to take his hand anyway. After a while, they ended up in a clearing, the one Ed led her to. Suddenly, the saint realized he looked just like a regular dude now. She looked around, surprised, and didn't have a clue where they were. Before this, they'd been hiking uphill for a while, Ed carrying her the whole way. Out of nowhere, he admitted he usually practices his swordsmanship here. That helped her figure out why all the trees were chopped down like that. Night fell, and then Ed started lighting up some lanterns. He lit a lantern marked with the saint's symbol and handed it to her. She was taken aback at first, but hurried to take the lantern anyway. He gently handed her the almost weightless festive thing. Violet finally understood why he'd brought her here. There was a specific order for launching the lanterns. The Lord had to go first. Then all his subjects would send theirs off. The girl smiled, wondering if she should wait for Daniel's lantern. Esselman continued to gaze thoughtfully at Violet. He squeezed the lantern and nudged her to launch it. The girl protested, thinking it was still too early for that. Ed stated that she was seriously mistaken about certain things. He said that no matter where she was, she had to be the one to launch the lantern first. After that, he decided he'd launch his own lantern right after her. Only after he said that did Violet realize something so obvious. Ed held the highest position, and she was on the same level as the king and the pope. It seemed obvious to her, but she still kept missing it. The girl froze in awe when she saw the bright landscape before her. Esselman kept watching her reaction intently. She never even imagined this view could be so amazing. Violet was admiring the lanterns when Ed approached her. He said he was acting as Marquis Ermengarde's proxy. He mentioned that her dad threw that official birthday bash to formally acknowledge her as one of them. Ed explained that even if they don't accept her, she's still a total badass. In his opinion, jealous haters are always going to try and bring her down. He wanted to remind her of her worth with that simple truth. He was trying to teach her, but he always screwed things up before. The kid hoped she'd stand strong and realize how awesome she is. He paused for a second, then said he wasn't going to help her out. Ed stared right into her eyes and ordered her to take back what's rightfully hers. He wasn't wasting time feeling sorry for her. He wanted to ignite her fighting spirit. Meanwhile, their little lanterns were dancing wildly in the air. bumping into each other. The Esselman lantern just happened to fall right into the flames. It went up in smoke with a crackle, turning to ash right above them. Looks like the Saintess and Ed were so caught up, they didn't even notice. After a while, they finally made it back to the estate. They saw that Daniel's carriage was back too. The Saintess froze when she saw something unbelievable. Standing right there was Annabella, dressed like total garbage and burning with shame. Her tired mom gave the Marquis's eldest son a real dirty look. She started screaming, blaming the Saintess for making the maid dress the kid like that. Annabella burst into tears, saying that this style was all the rage in the capital. Violet couldn't believe such a crazy coincidence. Adrian stepped out of the carriage, saying he almost burst, holding back his laughter. The Countess huffed, saying it was definitely the Saintess's order. Violet immediately shot back, saying she didn't do anything. Anne decided to back her up, saying it was true. The maid started gushing about the super expensive outfit from a hot designer. That little speech clued them in that Anne was the one who made it. The Countess kept on accusing the Saintess of all sorts of sins. She added that her daughter shouldn't have to put up with humiliation from commoners. The Countess started listing everything she was supposedly accusing the Saintess of. Ed whipped his head around to stare at his brother, who looked totally stunned. Adrian just straight up said he was the one who'd been messing with Annabelle all along. Then Anne chimed in, saying she was the one who brought up Andre Bona's work. She stated that Annabelle picked out the dress herself, and nobody took away her doll either. The maid mentioned that the saint already had a favorite toy. Violet was blown away by how amazing Anne was. She was defending the saint so hard that Annabelle totally lost it. She started crying and said that Anne gave her tea that was way too hot. Anne explained why and pointed out that she warned her about it. She also mentioned how the maids were all gossiping about the saint. "What the hell did we do wrong?" Annabella snapped, furious. The girl just kept rattling off all the things she hated. Anne expertly shot down every single one of her complaints. Annabella flinched when the maid brought up her weight. She couldn't take it anymore and swung her hand back. The girl just stared at the maid with a murderous look. Smiling, Anne did exactly what she told her. She lowered her head. Violet froze, not wanting something like this to happen. She saw the force Annabella was putting into that swing. Without thinking, the saint just bolted towards the maid. She ran up just in time to catch the girl's fist square in the face. All the brothers tensed up when they saw how hard she got smacked. Only the Countess was loving every second of it. Annabella pulled back her hand and asked her, annoyed, what she was doing. She asked if she was getting soft, because she related to Anne's situation. The saint calmly told her to stop hitting her maid. Annabella said she deserved it, considering Anne's behavior. Violet disagreed, saying the maid was just answering questions. She was accused of covering for the maid and disrespecting Annabella. Esselman watched the whole argument in silence. The saint saw the look in his eyes and remembered he wasn't gonna help her. She clenched her fist, knowing she had to protect herself. Violet cut right to the chase, asking how much longer she'd be ignored. She pointed out she'd done a lot to avoid a fight. The girl even mentioned giving her personal maid. She instantly recalled all those shameless things said about Anne. Violet defended herself and demanded an answer. She knew she had to stand up for herself now and stepped forward. The saint approached the Countess, mentioning how she and Anne were similar. The girl's face darkened, and she declared she'd be brought low too. That statement was so outrageous, it left everyone speechless. The saint declared they'd pay for bad-mouthing her lineage like that. She added that the Countess needed to be punished for her terrible manners. The woman protested, but Violet reminded her about the saint's power. She pointed out her authority was equal to the king's and the pope's. The girl quoted lines straight out of Agridia's official history. She confidently stated that the kingdom stood on those very principles. That was the first paragraph from a book everyone should know by heart. Those lines were as vital as the air we breathe, plain and simple. Violet had reread them countless times, still doubting their truth. Right then and there, she used those rules to protect herself. Ed smirked when she called herself a symbol and a legend. The saint really was the heart of Agridia, the thing that held it all together. The Countess flinched, totally caught off guard that the girl could defend herself. Violet added that her will should be respected more than just some young countess. She reminded her that only the king or the pope could stop her. The girl turned to Annabelle and told her to hit Anne again. She said that since she respected the guest's will, she should respect hers too. Annabella snapped and slapped her across the face, calling her an arrogant commoner. Adrian roared, but Daniel stopped him. Annabella smirked, thinking this would crush Violet. She figured that would be enough to make the girl chicken out. Her opinion flipped the second the saint walked up to the Countess. She firmly ordered the woman to bow her head down. The Countess apologized for her daughter, hinting the servants were watching. Violet saw right through her attempt to manipulate and control her. She asked what they'd been saying about her to the servants before this. The Countess trembled with rage, realizing her trick hadn't worked. She looked at Ed hopefully, expecting him to step in. But to her dismay, Esselman told her to do as the saint said. He added that he had absolutely no right to control what she did. Even Violet herself seemed surprised by his backing her up. The Countess gripped the hem of her dress, knowing she'd lost. Everyone froze, buzzing in whispers about what was happening. The next moment, Violet raised her hand above her head. Annabella started begging her for forgiveness for what she'd done. She was crying, pleading for mercy for her mother. Annabella straight up asked her what she'd do, like she was egging her on. The girl knew that either choice could make the saint look bad. She thought playing the victim would save her, but she just got a smile in return. The saint gently touched me and told me to get up off my knees. She confessed that she just wanted to play a prank on all of us at once. The saint said she didn't want something like this to ruin their friendship. She smiled like an angel and asked them to go easy on Anne. Annabella was so humiliated, her body even started to tremble. Violet saw that and smirked, saying she'd forgotten something. She addressed the Countess, frozen in a bow, and told her to chill out. No sooner had she said that than they suddenly needed to leave. The saint expertly hid all the turmoil that was raging inside. Mom and daughter hurried away, but Ed called out to them. Looks like Violet wasn't too thrilled about him butting in. She was caught off guard when he said they forgot to say goodbye to the saintess. Protocol says they gotta bow before leaving, you know? Ed chimed in, saying he didn't want to be held responsible for any slip-ups. The Countess bit her lip, all pissed off, and bowed to Saintess Violet. Right after that bow, they hauled ass back to the palace. Violet swallowed hard, realizing it was finally over. Esselman kept staring at the girl, lost in thought. He ordered Anne to take care of the saintess's wound back at the palace. Then he just took off, didn't even say a word to Violet. On the way to the palace, Anne couldn't help but think back to the festival. Annabella begged to release her lantern with Daniel. Anne froze when she heard the buzz about the god's seal appearing. She looked up and saw the holy symbol itself in the sky. The maid beamed, happy that the saint was with them this year. It gave people real hope for better times ahead. Right behind the saint's lantern was the Marquisate representative's lantern. Annabella was whining about not being first at the festival. I guess Daniel got the picture and shook his head, deep in thought. He decided to leave the platform to clear his head. The next day, Violet was having a blast hanging out with Anne. She was summoning flowers while they gossiped about how fast those annoying guests bolted. They practically cleared out of the estate the day after that whole incident. Before they left, though, they were both all sweetness and light to Violet. Anne stood up, saying they'd be heading back to the capital soon, too. The next thing they knew, a hyped-up Adrian came barreling towards them. The kid pounced on Violet, begging her to go to the festival that evening. Violet immediately ran off to ask her older brother for permission. She doubted he'd say yes, but she still figured she'd give it a shot. Adrian tried to promise he could make it happen, but nobody really trusted his word. After that, he bolted, all hurt and as fast as his legs could carry him. Violet started looking for him after he got all bent out of shape. She was booking it so fast, she accidentally bumped into Daniel. He was caught off guard when she started asking about his older brother's office. Violet froze up when she saw the sour look on his face. He snapped out of it and asked why she was looking for him. The girl explained that she wanted to ask permission to go to the festival. Daniel just gave her shoulder a menacing squeeze. He was about to shut her down, but Adrian ran up and said their older brother gave the okay. It seemed so unbelievable that everyone was completely floored. Violet couldn't believe they actually let her do it. Daniel stormed off, trying to hide how pissed he was. The saintess was stoked to finally get out of the castle. That night, she threw on a cloak so nobody'd recognize her. She had no clue the brothers would be holding her hands. Nobody said anything about there being 3 of them, not 2. Violet was annoyed to be led around like a kid. But the streets changed her mind. She was happy, but worried they'd get recognized and blown. Esselman calmed her down, saying hardly anyone remembers his face. Adrian just kept cracking jokes about how weird they looked. They moved ahead, and Ed squeezed the girl's hand even tighter. He watched her, noticing she still couldn't quite bring herself to trust him. One of the merchants spotted how tightly he was holding her hand, like he was afraid to lose her. She suggested they take a look at some jewelry that ladies love. The woman kept talking about how alike they seemed. She asked why he was trying to hide his sister's pretty face. He explained she had a big scar, and people might make fun of her. The woman felt for her and asked her to hold out her hand. In a flash, she clasped a bracelet onto Violet's wrist. Violet was blown away by how gorgeous the piece of jewelry was. Esselman just casually told her to pick something else out. The saint figured he was just being nice to the old lady and wanted to buy something. She decided to pick something cheap so she wouldn't burden him. Before she could say a word, he pulled out a whole sack of gold. She instantly grabbed his hand, telling him to hide the sack. She whispered, explaining they'd get suspicious looks. It was pretty obvious that a commoner wouldn't have gold coins. Ed seemed surprised when she said the shopkeeper wouldn't be able to make change. She realized that usually knights just handled all his needs. The saint's face fell, realizing he knew nothing about how regular people lived. What blew her mind was this dude didn't even know what change meant. She just calmly held out her hand and told him to hand over the bag. The old lady smiled and said that would be 10 coppers. The saint started frantically digging through her brother's pouch. Too bad for her, the pouch was only full of gold coins. She finally scraped together enough to pay for the jewelry somehow. Adrian saw her fighting spirit and said she was acting like a knight. Esselman just kept repeating change sternly, like he'd never heard it before. He asked, totally serious, if Adrian knew about this change thing. Unlike him, Adrian knew it meant taking back extra money if you overpaid. Guess even the prankster was surprised Ed didn't know that. They got jumpy when they heard the loud thud of hooves. Violet turned around, surprised, trying to figure out what was making the noise. Looks like Ed sensed something was off too, and he tensed up. He immediately grabbed the girl's hand, trying to get them out of there. Ed was moving so fast, Adrian had to run just to keep up. They kept pushing forward until the saint started to get winded. They finally made it to the knights who were chasing after them. The knight announced, loud as hell, that it was an emergency situation. They didn't know why, but they could already feel how messed up things were. Meanwhile, Daniel and Anne were running headfirst into trouble. Standing right in front of them was that duke they hated so much. He climbed out of his carriage, all smug, and headed straight for the estate. Cesare smirked, like he'd only just decided to show his face to the marquise. Little did he know, the saintess was hanging out at the festival market. Esselman frowned when he heard everything that had happened. Violet worried, suggesting it was time for them to head back. Adrian was just as lost, trying to figure out what was going on. The kids were surprised when their older brother shot them down. He passed the intel to the knight, telling him he was counting on him. Before he could even answer, Ed hopped on his horse and took off. The guy was left all alone with these two little hellions. He resigned himself to his fate, then got a shock when he saw the saint's hand. The knight perked right up, realizing he got to hold the saint's hand. They were so wrapped up in their chat, they totally forgot about the fireworks. The next thing they knew, they were getting crushed by the crowd. Violet just saw the knight's face getting all squished, and it looked like he was drifting away. Before they knew it, the crowd had ripped them apart. The saint tried to pull her hood up so she wouldn't be recognized. She stood there alone in the middle of the street, clueless about where she'd ended up. Violet tried to walk on, but some dude shoved her. He didn't watch his strength, and she ended up flat on her ass. This guy started yelling at her, saying she stole his wallet. The girl was like, "Whoa, hold up, that wasn't me." The scammer started threatening her with the cops and told her to take off the cloak. The Holy Maiden knew everyone would see her silver hair and the sack of coins. The guy saw she was getting flustered and kept piling on the pressure in front of everyone. She froze when someone said, "Enough with the lies already." Standing right there was that priest, the one who looked like a god. The scammer realized he screwed up and tried to say someone ripped Pra and him off. The guy just smirked, remembering he'd seen him pull the same crap on another girl. He added, all playful, that they really should go find a patrolman. No sooner did he mention the cops than the con artist bolted, scared stiff. The priest turned to the girl and said, "Well, look who it is." He locked her in his gaze, those amber eyes of his blazing like lava. The girl thanked him for helping her and agreed to go somewhere quiet. The young man confessed he'd been searching for her nonstop. He figured if he came here, they were bound to run into each other. The saint flinched when he said he almost offed that guy. He noticed she was spooked and apologized for his choice of words. The girl said she had to go back, but he was planning on taking her with him. She recoiled, saying her brother and knight were waiting for her. The guy replied he didn't want to hand her over to people she'd have to forget in the temple. Violet realized for the first time just how shady he was. Even his silver hair, like some saints, put her on edge. Still, she decided to ask him a question to clear things up. He smiled when she asked why they had the same hair color. As soon as she asked why no one noticed, he asked her if she could see it. He pressed close to the girl and demanded she name the color of his hair and eyes. The girl froze, but she still started answering his questions. He locked eyes with her, real intense, when she mentioned the amber color. The kid tucked himself into a corner, saying he was totally gonna get chewed out now. Violet decided to take advantage of his panic and just bail. No sooner did she say she was leaving, than he spun around and stared. He brushed off his clothes and said he'd get another shot, eventually. The kid suddenly got this glint in his eye and asked her what she thought of him. He begged her to look and tell him if he wasn't actually pretty cool. She politely agreed, but still wasn't down with tagging along with him. He decided to walk her out, answering questions about his appearance along the way. The kid said that with holy power, she could hide her appearance too. Her holy power let her see right through his lies. But even she couldn't see his true form if he didn't want her to. Their chat was cut short when a knight and Adrian rushed up to them. The kid immediately started chewing her out for wandering off so easily. He was definitely surprised to see her hanging out with a priest. The knight composed himself and asked what business he had here. The priest calmly explained everything that had happened to them. Violet gave a polite bow and thanked him for his help. He looked her straight in the eye and said he was heading out. The saint decided it was best to keep what happened between them a secret. She saw his back again and realized she never even learned his name. The next day, the palace went right back to its usual grind. While she worked, Anne kept replaying all the recent stuff in her head. Ever since Violet showed up at the estate, things have been crazy. The kid even managed to figure out how to use her holy power. She cried a lot over her friend and even got kidnapped. Anne couldn't even begin to say how proud she was of Violet standing up to the Countess. She was genuinely happy to watch the lady grow up. After the 7-day festival wrapped, they were all stoked about spring. Still, there was one question that kept bugging Anne. She couldn't figure out why Violet was so down. Anne tried to pry, but the saintess wasn't talking. From her answers, the maid guessed it wasn't about going back to the capital. She could see how lost Violet was in her own head. That same day, their carriage finally headed toward the capital. Sadly, Anne couldn't get anything out of her about what was bothering her. It was killing her to see the girl's face just getting gloomier. The maid perked up when the saintess called her name. To her surprise, the saintess firmly promised to protect her. Anne immediately started racking her brain about why she'd say that. The saint sat up straight when they heard a knock on the carriage. Esselman startled her, saying they'd already arrived at the palace. After a long ride to the capital, they could finally get out of that carriage. Anne looked ahead and finally understood what the lady was so worried about. Standing before them was a pissed-off countess, along with her daughter and the marquise. She dramatically dabbed her eyes, talking about the humiliation she'd suffered. The woman asked the marquise to consider if there was room in their family for a saint. She told him how they threatened to slap her in front of all the servants. The saint figured her days were numbered, and this would definitely piss off the marquise. After hearing Caroline's side, he turned to Ed for confirmation. The woman went all dramatic, saying it wasn't his fault. She claimed the saint was trained in the flower district to manipulate guys. Caroline said it'd be way better if he escorted her to the temple. Adrian jumped to the girl's defense, saying she didn't do anything wrong. He pointed out that his aunt was the one who neglected Saint Violet. The saint wondered if the marquise would buy it and let her off the hook. She decided to try and defend herself, remembering how the maids used to humiliate her. The countess pointed a finger at her, like she was the biggest liar ever. She smirked and asked if she wanted to slap her again. Violet looked down while the countess kept on mocking her. She couldn't help but wonder if she'd have to go through something like that. Being in the temple, she figured the marquis wouldn't stand for the kind of humiliation his little sister went through. The guy turned to her and said she already knew what had to be done. He stunned everyone by saying that not to Violet, but to Caroline. The woman froze, completely shocked when he ordered her to kneel. He confessed he hadn't kicked her out, just so he could wait for the saint to arrive. Bjorn said sternly that she had officially crossed the line. He stated that her behavior showed exactly what she thought of the saint. The woman started begging for forgiveness, saying how ashamed she was. Annabella decided to play the pity card and burst into loud sobs. The countess was all like, "How dare you tell me to kneel before my own daughter?" The dude choked back his disgust for these people. He gave crying Annabelle a super fake, gentle pat on the head. Then, out of nowhere, the Marquis suggests she kneel instead of her mom. He said she's just as reckless and stupid as her mother. Bjorn's like, "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about you beating the saint?" He called her out for lying and saying the saint was tormenting her. The guy asked if she could actually say all this to the king's face. He made her realize just how wrong they all were about everything. Bjorn repeated, again, just how damn important the saint really is. The countess called Violet a low-born commoner, who suspiciously became a saint. Bjorn snapped back, saying he recognized this child as his daughter. The countess couldn't believe he was defending this kid so fiercely. Despite all the tension, Violet felt a warmth from his words. The man calmed down and said she was living on their estate now. On top of that, the saint also got the Ermengarde family name. All these things added up to her becoming the Marquise's daughter. Violet never imagined he'd talk about her so kindly. The Marquise shut it down, completely destroying the Countess's argument. Violet just kept thinking about how he called her his daughter. She didn't even notice right away that Ed was holding her hand. The girl realized he was staring right into her eyes again and blushed. She was beyond shocked when she realized he'd just done it for no reason. He just squeezed her hand, but it was like she instantly felt calmer. The Marquis announced that the Countess was no longer part of the Ermengarde family. He added that their family wouldn't even accept her as a guest. The man glared at her, saying he'd never forget how she humiliated his daughter. Caroline couldn't understand how he could consider that commoner his daughter. She knew he wasn't one to make empty threats or change his mind easily. She decided to swallow her pride, not wanting to lose her status. Caroline stopped right in front of the saint and bowed low. She begged the saint to forgive her and her daughter. The Marquise watched Violet thoughtfully, like she was the one in charge. The girl told her to stand up and said she didn't want to hear about it anymore. The woman silently touched the floor and slowly stood up. She walked around the saint like she was the one she hated most. Caroline left. promising herself that Violet would pay for this humiliation. The Marquis waited for her to leave, then told everyone to go back. Everyone hurried back, feeling a sense of relief wash over them. Only Violet remained standing exactly where she was. She figured everything went wrong because of her and apologized. The girl started whimpering and admitted to her dad that she messed up. The guy knew it wasn't her fault, but she was used to blaming herself for everything. He gently stroked her head and asked what she was talking about. The Marquis grinned and said he'd been reading her letters, every single one saying how much she missed him. The saint thought that's how etiquette worked and didn't know why he was smiling. She got flustered when she realized Anne had totally played her. Before she could even say anything, the Marquis swept her up in his arms. He said he never knew what it was like to get letters like that from a daughter. The Marquis smiled gently and said he missed her too. After that sweet moment, they headed back to the palace together. Violet was mortified that he was still carrying her. The saintess was red as a beet and asked him to put her down. The butler chimed in, said she was uncomfortable, and told him to let her go too. He set her down and suggested she eat with everyone else. The Marquise picked up on her unease and figured she was still feeling awkward. The girl looked dejected and asked if it wasn't them who didn't want to see her. The Marquis froze, shocked she thought that was the problem. The man knelt down and said he just wanted her to feel relaxed while they ate. Because of his words, Violet's world, where everyone disliked her, started to change. She was scared they'd reject her because she came from nothing. She found out Finn was a liar, and the Viscountess was a tyrant. She also learned about the kindness of Countess Racel, who she'd never even met. She needed answers, but she never actually asked for them. She decided to change and asked her dad if they could have dinner together. The old man smiled, glad they'd finally cleared up the misunderstanding. He gently squeezed her hand and agreed to let her eat with everyone. That same night, she met the goddess again in her dream. The mysterious girl was gently stroking the saint's hair. Violet told her how Adrian would slip her food even when she was already full. She said she wasn't the same girl who cried over being treated like crap anymore. Now she's tougher, smarter, and way more confident in herself. She explained that Adrian only acts that way because he cares about her. Violet knew that already, but it still felt good to hear someone say it. She was thankful that a goddess would meet her in her dreams. Her heart swelled, knowing she had a new family waiting for her in real life. She froze, sensing something like flying at them from behind. Violet flinched, scared like something bad was about to go down. The goddess noticed how on edge the girl had suddenly become. Violet tried sniffing the air and caught a whiff of something nasty. She knew that smell well. She even recognized it from her dreams. After that, her dream cut short, and she hurried to start a new day. She felt the pressure weighing down on her after everything that went down yesterday. It felt like the whole vibe was totally different than before. Servants who used to be indifferent were now fawning over St. Violet. She smiled when good old Chef Jack greeted her. He pointed out how much she'd grown since they last saw each other. Jack wanted to please her, so he asked what she'd like for dinner. The girl smiled and said that whatever he made, she knew it would be delicious. Jack was touched by such sweet, genuine words about him. His 15 minutes of fame got snatched up by a bunch of gushing maids right away. The kid got flustered by all the sweet talk coming from the women. She heard the question and said she just wanted to come here alone. They jumped all over her, offering to tag along with her. The maids immediately threw a ton of ideas at her for what to do with her time. She bolted to get away from all the attention and just said no. Violet was still turning that dream over in her head and decided to visit the chapel. Looks like she didn't even realize she'd walked all the way here. All this attention was still a real drag for her. She decided to crack the door open and head inside the chapel. The place was empty, except for a statue of a saint. It was Agridia's first saint, a total legend. Violet couldn't help but wonder why her eyes were closed. She stared at it, realizing she looked just like the goddess from her dream. Violet wondered if she could ever become like her. She turned around when Daniel said he knew she was in here. She was trying to figure out why he looked so bummed out. The guy patted her head and said she'd changed a lot. He added that she seemed like a stranger, but she denied it. Daniel's smile vanished, like he was pissed at the saint. He clenched his fist tighter and asked if she really believed in God. Daniel saw Violet freeze up and glanced over at the statue. He told her he'd prayed to that God the day his mom was dying. He knew his whole family was praying for the same thing, but God didn't show. The kid felt like there wasn't a single person in the world more ignored than him. He looked sadly at the girl and said he didn't believe in God. The saint didn't say a word, but she saw all his sadness and pain. She wanted to soothe his soul and stroked her brother's cheek. He squeezed her fingers and said he loved her more than anything. Daniel felt her trembling and asked if she knew that. He kissed her little hand, saying possessively that she was his. The girl saw that creepy look and felt the terror all over again. She remembered Malum's words when he called her his own. She remembered that all-encompassing fear, sinking its claws into her. That fear gripped her like a predator seizing its prey. He stared at her with red eyes, saying she couldn't escape. Lost in all of this, she pushed Daniel away with all her might. It was like he wasn't even himself anymore. The girl started shaking and apologized for rejecting him. She apologized again and ran as fast as she could. A few days later, the Marquis wanted to talk something over with her. Just the two of them sat down with some tasty tea. She saw the Marquis looking thoughtful and didn't know why she was called. He'd been sitting there all grumpy ever since reading that letter before lunch. Finally, the guy announced that they were having visitors today. He said, sounding bummed out, that 10 high priests were coming over. The saint flinched, realizing the Marquis couldn't say no. He used to turn them down, but they insisted she get theology training. The temple was adamant that a high priest specifically had to teach her. The girl knew she couldn't just up and refuse. She felt bummed out, knowing the Marquis was so down because of her. The Marquis froze when she asked him who she was supposed to pick. It was like she just gave him the idea of how they could take back control. He figured they'd already chosen the next tutor. The saintess blushed hard, because she thought she was the one who had to choose. She kicked herself for saying something so totally ridiculous. She said she'd gotten the wrong idea, but the Marquis actually praised her. He looked at her and said she was absolutely the one who should be choosing. That same day, they started prepping for the visit. All she could think about was the tough choice that was coming up. The temple split aggression into 10 regions, each with its own main temple. A high priest ruled each one, making sure everyone played by the rules. It was super rare for all of them to gather in one place, like almost never. Even the king never witnessed something this damn important before. The girl knew it was time to go when she heard her dad's voice. She turned around, feeling all jittery hearing about the guests arriving. Violet followed her father towards the door without a peep. The Marquis gave her some backup, saying she'd do great. Seeing her dad so confident helped her chill out a little. He warned her the priests would try to put the squeeze on them. He said they gotta follow her orders, no questions asked. Beorn mentioned all the high priests would be on the temple's side. Only Esteban seemed to have a pure soul and was friendly to them. He told them to remember he's got a scar on his forehead and he's young. The girl recalled those words again, readying herself for the meeting. Every member of the Ermengarde family froze. Waiting for the priests, Violet felt the full weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She saw the sunlight and promised herself she'd get through it all. A crowd of men bowed before her, and she felt like everything would be all right. The head high priest greeted the messenger of God. After the pleasantries, they were all ushered into the main hall. Violet scanned the crowd, searching for the guy with the scar on his forehead. It didn't take long before she finally spotted the man she was looking for. She could feel a power radiating off him that was way stronger than the others. High Priest Dublin declared that the Marquis couldn't ignore the Lord any longer. He called him out for the saint still being ignorant of theology. Violet explained that her training was delayed because she was illiterate. She admitted that her education wasn't advanced enough to study God's word yet. The priests jumped all over her, telling her to dedicate herself to studying. Violet clenched her fist, thinking they were no different from the guys back on Flower Street. She knew that no matter how hard she tried, all they wanted was an image of a saint. The girl refused to give them that and told them they were right. She added that she wouldn't be able to give it her all without more training. Finally, she declared that she needed to pick a mentor for herself. Everyone around was stunned by her assertive and risky decision. Dublin spat out that she wasn't smart enough to make the right choice. The girl froze, stumped by his question about criteria she hadn't considered. She just knew from the start which priest she wanted to choose. Violet remembered that radiating power again, and it all clicked. She said she really couldn't rely on her brains for this one. She added that those qualities shouldn't matter, even if she did have them. The saintess declared she believed everyone was worthy of her training. She said she'd choose a mentor based on the power God invested in each of them. Dublin frowned, realizing she'd cornered them. One of the priests wanted clarification and raised his hand. That same priest stated that they should conceal their faces. The saintess twitched, feeling her plan falling apart at the seams. He added that she didn't need to know who they were or what they looked like. The others backed him up, suggesting they turn around and throw on a cloak. The girl looked at her father, lost and searching for support. He gave her this confident nod, like telling her to just agree. A minute later, every priest was standing before her, heads bowed low. The saintess swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the responsibility. Beorn decided to give her a nudge, ordering her to make her choice. The next thing you know, she's scanning the power of each one of them. She needed to find the priest with a ton of pure energy. Finally, her eyes snapped open with joy, feeling like she'd found him. Without a word, she stepped forward to announce her pick. All her brothers watched the girl's fate with bated breath. She stood in front of the guy, and then everyone took off their robes. Violet couldn't believe her eyes when she realized she'd made the wrong choice. She noticed High Priest Esteban standing far away from her. She didn't get what the deal was, since he was the one radiating the strongest energy. Violet started racking her brain, trying to figure out who she'd mistakenly picked. The high priest she did choose bowed and took her hand. He threw off his robe, revealing his red hair to everyone. Everyone was stunned when they heard Duke Chesure's voice. Looks like even the priests were blown away by that twist. In that instant, Violet knew their success was impossible. Chesure grinned and reminded her how he'd once promised to come back to her.